Otakold na área, galera, mais uma live começando na sua telinha ou na sua telona, tanto faz. Importante que estamos aqui para falar hoje sobre um assunto muito importante, mais uma vez. Deixa eu ver aqui. Deixa eu tirar da tela aqui por enquanto. Como estão todos? Ana, cada vez boa noite, pessoal. Foi a primeira a chegar aí. Boa noite, bem-vinda à live. O pessoal tá chegando aos pouquinhos. Como é que vocês estão aí? Como é que tá o som aí pra vocês? A música tá alta. Deixa eu baixar um pouquinho aqui. Pra mim tá alta. Aí. Vamos aí já. Olha aí, chegou o Luciano Sacardo. Boa noite, bem-vindo à live aí. Gratidão pela presença. Bem-vindo aí à live. Tudo bem? Já vão deixando o seu like, se inscrevendo aqui no canal se ainda não for inscrito. Seja mais do que bem-vindo. Recados iniciais, né? Vocês podem mandar aí seu superchat com o IA, inteligência artificial, ou seu superchat aí, através do link fixado aí nos comentários ao vivo. Ou também aqui, ó, no QR Code que tá aqui na tela. Vocês conseguem também. Tem o link também fixado, o link na descrição do vídeo. É tanta coisa. Quem quiser se tornar membro do canal, também fica o convite aí. Apenas R$ 2,99 por mês. Vocês ajudam pra caramba aqui o meu trabalho. Olha a Soci Pérez aí, boa noite, Otakold, bem-vinda. Diego Toneiro, pessoal aí, membros do canal, bem-vindos aí. Reinaldo Silva, bem-vindo à live. Boa noite a todos. Estamos só começando. Quem quiser se tornar membro é o segundo link, não, o primeiro link na descrição. Vocês se tornam membros aqui do canal para ajudar, tá certo? Bom, já fizemos uma live aí toda sobre o Zuckerberg, né? Quando ele saiu aquele vídeo dele falando que ia apoiar a liberdade nas redes sociais, né? Também falando sobre o Trump e o governo, que estaria ajudando o governo também, que vai passar as suas instalações e parte de discussão sobre liberdade, tudo, enfim, as instalações do Meta parece que vão para o Texas lá, junto com o Elon Musk lá, junto com o pessoal da SpaceX. Já comentamos sobre isso numa live, tá aqui, busquem aí, vejam as outras lives, né? Na live passada a gente falou sobre as IAs especificamente, né? Se seria possível um apocalipse aí causado pela inteligência artificial. Foi muito boa a live de ontem. Bastante conhecimento, bastante despertar. E tem a nossa enquete de hoje aí, ó. Já tá rolando, você já pode votar. Você acredita em liberdade nas redes sociais? E aí fica a pergunta. Sim, Zuckerberg e Musk estão juntos. Lembrando que o Mark Zuckerberg, ele é dono do Meta, que é dono do Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp e mais algumas coisas, né? E o Elon Musk, aí do Twitter, né? O X, de redes sociais, fora a SpaceX, a Tesla, enfim, uma infinidade de empresas aí, né? Ou não, os governos vão resistir, né? Os governos vão bater de frente contra toda essa liberdade em redes sociais. Meta e Google doaram $1 milhão para a posse do Trump. Então, hoje a gente vai descobrir o porquê que tá todo mundo, né, a favor do governo. Não é só oportunismo, não. Tem muito mais coisa envolvida, inclusive sobre inteligência artificial, né? Sobre inteligência artificial também. A gente ficou discutindo sobre isso, né? Por que o Zuckerberg agora do nada, né? Que não foi do nada, a gente vai ver hoje. Por que ele migrou e tá expondo tudo isso, assim, sobre o governo passado americano, o que estava acontecendo. Enfim, né? Várias reuniões aconteceram com o governo lá e eles estão abrindo tudo. Hoje a gente vai reagir ao podcast do Joe Rogan, podcast que aconteceu ontem à noite, ao vivo, né? O podcast, acho que é o número 1 do mundo, né? O número 1 do mundo do Joe Rogan, foi onde o pessoal do Flow se inspirou, né? O Monark se inspirou para fazer igual aqui no Brasil com o Flow, né? Agora, depois que ele saiu do Flow, você sabe que já virou outra coisa, né? Não dá nem pra dizer que aquilo ali lembra o que foi já o Flow, né? Bom, enfim, deixa eu já colocar aqui na tela. Pra gente começar a discussão. É legendado, tá, gente? Não tem dublado, né, obviamente. Mas a gente vai acompanhar aqui, aparecendo alguma coisa importante. Também eu vou parando, vou falando com vocês. Vocês podem interagir aí. Enfim, a gente vai discutindo aí aos pouquinhos tudo isso que tá rolando, tá? Pausar nossa trilha aqui. Maria Salete Chaves Souza, bem-vinda à live aí, gratidão pela presença. Prefeita de Los Angeles foi treinada em Cuba. Fez 15 viagens para Cuba. Culpada dos incêndios sims, extremista. Canal Professora Belei. Interessante, prefeita de Los Angeles foi treinada em Cuba. É uma comunista então que estava de prefeita lá em Los Angeles, né? Eu não duvido mesmo. Eu não duvido. Poderiam abrir coisas obscuras do nosso país. E vai acontecer, Reinaldo. Pode printar aí, pode anotar que vai acontecer. Eles já estão trabalhando todos juntos a favor da liberdade por todo o planeta aí. Vai vir aos pouquinhos, vai chegar no Brasil sim. Governo do velhinho em xeque. Né? Do seu Nine aí, tá em xeque agora o Chandovsky aí, o Lex Luthor. Tenho até receio de falar os nomes aqui, né? Porque vai se saber, né? Mas você sabe o que eu tô falando, né? Cabeça de ovo lá. Enfim. Vamos acompanhando aqui. Vocês me falam se o som tá bom, como é que tá. Vamos vendo se tá dando pra ler também. Deixa eu me organizar aqui com a tela. Deixar os comentários de vocês aqui. Espera aí. Boa noite, Gideon. Bem-vindo à live aí. Gratidão demais aí pela presença. Bem-vindo. Perfeito, certo. Vamos lá.
All right, bro. What's happening? Good to see you.
You too?
What's going on?
You know, chill week.
Yeah. Sort of. This recent announcement that you did about content moderation, how has that been received?
Já começaram a falar sobre a moderação, né, de redes sociais e tudo mais. Como é que tá a legenda aí? Tá dando pra ler? Deixa eu arrumar aqui pra ficar mais visível um pouco. Acho que tá cortando um cantinho. Isso aqui é legenda gerada automática, tá? Não é do próprio programa lá. Então, se não tiver perfeita, perdão aí. Deixa eu ajeitar aqui. Já dá pra aumentar mais um pouquinho. Aí. Acho que tá bom assim, né? Reinaldo, e também da Califórnia, também esquerda. Pois é, né? Vão cair aos pouquinhos, né? Todos eles vão caindo aos pouquinhos. Vamos lá?
Probably depends on who you ask.
Right.
But you know, but look, I mean, I've been working on this for a long time. So, I mean, you got to do what you think is right. You know, we've been on a long journey here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's and I think at some level you only start one of these companies if you believe in giving people a voice, right? I mean,
você só cria uma empresa dessa se você está a fim de dar voz às pessoas, né? E tá comentando.
I mean, the whole point of social media is basically, you know, giving people the ability to share what they want.
Right.
And you know, it goes back to, you know, our original mission is just give people the power to share and make the world more open and connected.
What do you think started the pathway towards increasing censorship? Because clearly we were going in that direction for the last few years. It seemed like we really found out about it when Elon bought Twitter and we got the Twitter files. And when you came on here, And when you were explaining the relationship with FBI, where they were trying to get you to take down certain things that were true and real, and certain things they tried to get you to limit the exposure to them. So it's these kind of conversations. Like, when did all that start?
Yeah, well, look, I think going back to the beginning, or like I was saying, I think you start one of these if you care about giving people a voice. You know, I wasn't too deep on our content policies for like the first 10 years of the company. It was just kind of well known across the company that we were trying to give people the ability to share as much as possible. And issues would come up, practical issues, right? So if someone's getting bullied, for example, we deal with that, right? We put in place systems to fight bullying.
Right.
You know, if someone is saying, hey, you know, someone's pirating copyrighted content on the service, it's like, okay, we'll build controls to make it so we'll find IP protected content. But it was really in the last 10 years that people started pushing for like ideological based censorship. And I think it was two main events.
Nos últimos 10 anos que ele tem notado que a ideologia tem influenciado mais, né?
That really triggered this. In 2016, there was the election of President Trump, also coincided with basically Brexit in the EU and sort of the fragmentation
All
of the
Brexit
EU.
aí.
And then, you know, in 2020, there was COVID. And I think that those were basically these two events where, for the first time, we just faced this massive institutional pressure to basically start censoring content on ideological grounds.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when it first came up in 2016, did it come under the guise of the Russian collusion hoax?
And this is the thing. At the time, I was really sort of ill-prepared to kind of parse what was going on, right? It's, you know, I think part of my reflection looking back on this is I kind of think in 2016 in the aftermath, I gave too much deference to a lot of folks in the media who were basically saying, okay, there's no way that this guy could have gotten elected except for misinformation. People can't actually believe this stuff, right? It has to be that there's this kind of like massive misinformation out there. Some of it started with the Russia collusion stuff, but it kind of morphed into different things over time.
Well, he was so ideologically polarizing, right? Like, people didn't want to believe that anybody looked at him and said, this should be our president.
Yeah, so I took this and just kind of assumed that everyone was acting in good faith. And I said, okay, well, there are concerns about misinformation. We should, just like when people raised other concerns in the past and we try to deal with them, okay, yeah, people no, you know, if you ask people, no one says that they want misinformation, so maybe there's something that we should do to basically try to address this. But I was really worried from the beginning about basically becoming this sort of decider of what is true in the world, right? That's like kind of a crazy position to be in for billions of people using your service. And so we tried to put in place a system that would deal with it. You know, and early on tried to basically make it so that it was really limited. We're like, all right, we're just going to have this system where there's these third-party fact checkers and they can check the worst of the worst stuff, right? So things that are very clear hoaxes, that there's like, it's not like we're not parsing speech about whether something is slightly true or slightly false, like Earth is flat, you know, things like that, right? So that was sort of the original intent. We put in place the system and it just sort of veered from there. I think to some degree, it's because some of the people whose job is to do fact checking, a lot of their industry is focused on political fact checking. So they just kind of veered in that direction. And we kept on trying to basically get it to be what we had originally intended, which is just, you know, it's not, the point isn't to like judge people's opinions. It's to provide, you know, this layer to kind of help fact check some of the stuff that seems the most extreme.
Boa noite.
But it just, you know, it was just never accepted by people broadly. I think people just felt like the fact checkers were too biased. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily even so much in what they ruled, although sometimes I think people would disagree with that. A lot of the time, it was just what types of things they chose to even go and fact check in the first place. So, I kind of think, like, after having gone through that whole exercise, it I don't know, it's something
Boa
out
noite,
of like,
Valdelina.
1984, one
Bem-vinda.
of these books where it's just like, it really is a slip.
Ele comparou a 1984 aqui, hein? Coisa que a gente fala nas lives aí, comenta em vários lugares, né? Falando sobre as pessoas que estavam querendo censurar as coisas nas redes dele aí, com ideologia política e tudo. Tu vê, né? Eu sinceramente eu esperava o contrário dele, como eu falei naquela live especial que a gente fez sobre ele, desse vídeo recente dele. Mas ele tá me surpreendendo. Tá me surpreendendo realmente. O professor Lars fala em habitantes intraterrenos na Amazônia. A aula foi interessante. Tamo junto de novo. Isso aí, Joselito. Bem-vindo aí. Sempre juntos aí. Joselito é membro do canal aí. Também tem voz ativa. Boa noite, Amanda. Bem-vinda. Boa noite a todos. Bem-vinda à live aí. Aqui a gente vê completo, não vê cortezinho. A gente vai ver a real. Todo o papo aqui deles conversando sobre tudo que tá acontecendo no mundo aí. O Zuckerberg já comparou o que está acontecendo a 1984, o livro e o filme aquele. Boa noite Zerito, boa noite Amanda, o pessoal se cumprimentando e todos bem-vindos aí. Sinto-se em casa.
Slippery slope. And it just got to a point where it's just, okay, this is destroying so much trust, especially in the United States, to have this program. And I guess it was probably about a few years that I really started coming to the conclusion that we were going to need to change something about that. COVID was the other big one, where that was also very tricky because, at the beginning it was, it's like a legitimate public health crisis, in the beginning, and it's even people who are like the most ardent First Amendment, defenders, the Supreme Court has this clear precedent that's like, all right, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. There are times when if there's an emergency, your ability to speak can temporarily be curtailed in order to get an emergency under control. So I was sympathetic to that at the beginning of COVID. It seemed like, okay, you have this virus. It seems like it's killing a lot of people.
Ele falando sobre a panda que a gente passou, né? Da picadinha e tudo. No início ele acreditou no governo e tudo, foi a favor do governo. Tentando ajudar.
No, like we didn't know at the time how dangerous it was going to be. So at the beginning, it kind of seemed like, okay, we should give a little bit of deference to the government and the health authorities on how we should play this. But when it went from, 2 weeks to flatten the curve to, and like in the beginning, it was like, okay, there aren't enough masks. Masks aren't that important. To then it's like, oh no, you have to wear a mask. And,
Gente, esse é uma das entrevistas mais importantes da nossa década, talvez, hein? Falando sobre tudo abertamente aí, hein? O Zuckerberg. Tô gostando pra caramba.
Like everything was shifting around. It just became very difficult to kind of follow. And this really hit the most extreme, I'd say, during the Biden administration when they were trying to roll out the vaccine program. And I'm generally like pretty pro rolling out vaccines. I think on balance, the vaccines are more positive than negative. But I think that while they're trying to push that program, they also tried to censor anyone who is basically arguing against it. And they...
Ele achou estranho eles estarem censurando quem falava, discordava de alguma coisa, questionava, né? Como a gente também, durante a Panda, né? Que tinha alguma coisa errada aí.
Pushed us super hard to take down things that were true, right? I mean, they basically pushed us and said,
Bem-vindo, Edson.
Anything that says that vaccines might have side effects, you basically need to take down. And I was just like, well, we're not going to do that. Like, we're clearly not going to do that. I mean, that is kind of inarguably true.
Who is they? Who's telling you to take down things that
it was
that talk about vaccine side effects?
It was people in the Biden administration. I think it was I wasn't involved in those conversations directly, but I think it was.
How difficult is that to not be involved in those conversations directly? Fitness isn't just about what you do in the gym, it's also about your nutrition, but even with the best diet, some nutrients can be hard to get, and AG1 can help fill those gaps. AG1 delivers value ball to control them. I want you to understand that whether it's YouTube or all these, whatever place that you think is doing something that's awful,
it's wild.
More than a third of the planet. It's got to be strange too, right? Because our value gift for free if you go to drinkag1.com/Joe Rogan. Seriously, get on this. That's got to be strange too, right? Because you're running the company, but there's clearly you're moderating at scale that's beyond the imagination. The number of human beings you're moderating is fucking insane. Like, what's a Facebook? How many people use it on a daily basis? Forget about how many overall. Like, how many people use it regularly?
It's 3.2 billion people use one of our services every day. It's wild.
More than a third of the planet. That's so crazy.
Yeah, and it's
almost half of Earth.
Well, on a monthly basis, it is probably half of it. But
pois é, Ani Santos. Tem muita gente que estava acreditando nisso, hein? E eu já não estava acreditando de início e agora, depois de tudo que a gente está apurando e vendo da conversa aqui, eu acho que ele já era contra. Começou a ver aos pouquinhos o que estava rolando e comecei a ver o buraco que estava se enfiando. E é complicado. Hoje eu publiquei um vídeo lá no Instagram que explica bastante sobre isso aí, tá? Nas reuniões que eles participaram do governo Biden lá, eles ficaram impressionados com algumas coisas, inclusive de monopólio da inteligência artificial, que só o governo ia poder mexer e ninguém mais. E isso afastou eles ainda mais do governo progressista do Biden, né? Do governo democrata, entre aspas, de lá. Ele joga o jogo. Vamos ver com o tempo, né? O tempo mostra as verdades, né? Vamos ver quem é que vai estar certo aí, né? Vamos ver de que lado ele realmente luta aí.
I want to say that though, there's a lot of like hypercritical people that are conspiracy theorists and think that everybody's a part of some cabal to control them. I want you to understand that whether
Teoria
it's
da
YouTube
conspiração,
or
cabala.
whatever place that you think is doing something that's awful, it's good that you speak. Because this is how things get changed, and this is how people find out that people are upset about content moderation and censorship. But moderating at scale is insane.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
What we were talking the other day about the number of videos that go up every hour on YouTube, and it's bananas. It's bananas. That's like to try to get a human being that is reasonable, logical, and objective that's going to analyze every video. It's virtually impossible. It's not possible. So you got to use a bunch of tools. You're going to get a bunch of things wrong.
Yep.
And you have also people reporting things. And how much is that going to affect things? You could have mass reporting because you have bad actors. You have some corporation that decides we're going to attack this video because it's bad for us, get it taken down.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much going on. I want to put that in people's heads before we go on. Like, understand the kind of numbers that we're talking about here. Now understand you have the pandemic. And then you have the administration that's doing something where I think they crossed the line, where it gets really weird, where they're saying what you were saying. They were trying to get you to take down vaccine side effects, which is just crazy.
Yeah, so, I mean, like you're saying, I mean, it's so complicated, this system, that I could spend every minute of all of my time doing this and not actually focused on building any of the things that we're trying to do. AI, glasses, like the future of social media, all that stuff. So I mean, I get involved in this stuff, but in general, we have a policy team. There are people who I trust. They're the people who are kind of working on this on a day-to-day basis. And the interactions that I was just referring to, I mean, a lot of this is documented. I mean, because Jim Jordan and the House had this whole investigation and committee into the kind of government censorship around stuff like this. And we produced all these documents, and it's all in the public domain. I mean, basically, these people from the Biden administration would call up our team and, like, scream at them and curse. And it's like these documents are...
O pessoal da administração Biden chegava, ligava para eles, entrava em contato com eles e gritava com eles, né, por muita coisa que era publicado.
Record any of those phone calls?
I don't think we but I think
I want to listen.
I mean, there are emails. the emails are published. It's all
Os e-mails são públicos.
And
tá tudo
like,
por aí.
And basically, it just got to this point where we were like, no, we're not gonna take down things that are true. That's ridiculous.
Ele tá realmente acreditando, né, que ele tá vivendo o 1984, né? Regulação total do governo em cima deles. Inacreditável, né? Ele pagou pra ver, né? Pagou pra ver, o Zuckerberg pagou pra ver e viu como é que esse tipo de governo age e trabalha, né? A gente já sabia mais ou menos, né? Como é que seria. Agora ele pagou pra ver e descobriu.
They wanted us to take down this meme of Leonardo DiCaprio looking at a TV talking about how 10 years from now or something, you're going to see an ad that says, okay, if you took a COVID vaccine, you're eligible for, for this kind of payment, like this sort of like class action lawsuit type meme. And they're like, no, you have to take that down. We just said, no, we're not going to take down humor and satire. We're not going to take down things that are true. And then at some point, I guess
pegava no pé até por memes.
Flipped a bit. I mean, Biden, when he gave some statement at some point, I don't know if it was a press conference or to some journalists, where he basically was like, these guys are killing people, and I don't know. Then like all these different agencies and branches of government basically just like started investigating and coming after our company. It was brutal. It was brutal.
Começaram a vir pra cima da empresa dele, investigando tudo.
It's just a massive overstep.
Uma verdadeira ditadura, né?
And also, you weren't killing people. This is the thing about all of this. It's like they suppressed so much information about things that people should be doing, regardless of whether or not you believe in the vaccine.
Não importa se tu acredita ou não no
Metabolic
picadinho.
health is of the utmost importance in your everyday life, whether there's a pandemic or there's not. And there's a lot of things that you can do that can help you recover from illness. It prevents illnesses. It makes your body more robust and healthy. It strengthens your immune system. And they were suppressing all that information. And that's
Estavam suprimindo essas informações,
you can't say
né?
you're one of the good guys if you're suppressing information that would help people recover from all kinds of diseases, not just COVID, the flu, common cold, all sorts of different things, high doses of vitamin C, D3 with K2 and magnesium. They were suppressing this stuff because they didn't want people to think that you could get away with not taking a vaccine, which is really crazy when you're talking about something that
empurrando todo mundo pra
99.07% of people survive. This is a crazy overstep, but scared the shit out of a lot of people. Red-pilled, as it were, a lot of people because they realized, like, oh, 1984 is like an instruction manual. I mean, it's like it shows you how things can go that way with wrong speak and with bizarre distortion of facts. And when it comes down to it, in today's day and age, the way people get information is through your platform, through X. This is how people are getting information. They're getting information from YouTube. They're getting information from a bunch of different sources now. And you can't censor that if it's real legitimate information because it's not ideologically convenient for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's basically the journey that I've been on, right? Started off very pro free speech, free expression. And then over the last 10 years, there have been these two big episodes. It was the Trump election and the aftermath, where I feel like in retrospect, I deferred too much to the kind of critique of the media on what we should do. And since then, I think generally trust in media has fallen off a cliff, right? So I don't think I'm alone in that.
A confiança da mídia caiu vertiginosamente nesse meio tempo, né?
The experience that a lot of people have had is, okay, it's the stuff that's being written about is not kind of all accurate.
O mundo é outro,
and
né?
even if the facts are right, it's kind of written from a slant a lot of the time.
Of course.
And then there was the government version of it, which was during COVID, which is okay. Like, it's like our government is telling us that we need to censor true things. It's like, this is a disaster. And it's not just the U.S., right? I think a lot of people in the U.S. focus on this as an American phenomenon, but I kind of think that the reaction to COVID probably caused a breakdown in trust in a lot of governments around the world. Because, I mean, 2024 was a big election year around the world, and there are all these countries, India, just like a ton of countries that have.
Basicamente ele falando que a Panda serviu para quebrar o sistema, né? Ninguém mais acredita nos governos como uma fonte segura de informação. Que legal ver o Zuckerberg falando sobre isso, né? Não é qualquer pessoa.
Had that had elections, and the incumbents basically lost every single one. So there is some sort of a global phenomenon where the whether it was because of inflation, because of the economic policies to deal with COVID, or just how the governments dealt with COVID, seems to have had this effect that's global, not just the U.S., but like a very broad decrease in trust, at least in that set of incumbents, and maybe in sort of these democratic institutions overall. So I think that what you're saying of, how do people get their information now? It's by sharing it online on social media. I think that that's just increasingly true. And my view at this point is like, all right, like we started off focused on free expression. We kind of had this pressure tested over the last period. I feel like I just have a much greater command now of what I think the policies should be. And like, this is how it's going to be going forward. And so I mean, at this point, I think a lot of people look at this as like a purely political thing. It's because they kind of look at the timing and they're like, hey, well, you're doing this right after the election. It's like, okay, I try not to like change our content rules like right in the middle of an election either, right? It's like there's not like a great time to do this. It's
right.
And
you want to do it a year later.
Yeah, it's like there's no good time to do it. There's, right. And whatever time is going on, there's going to be, so. The good thing about doing it after the election is you get to take this kind of cultural pulse as like, okay, where are people right now, and how are people thinking about it? We try to have policies that reflect, mainstream discourse. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is something I've been thinking about for a while. I think that this is going to be pretty durable because at this point we've just been pressure tested on this stuff for like the last 8 to 10 years.
Ele acha que está apenas no começo, né? Que é recém começar a pressionar e ele acha que vai ser cada vez pior. Ele está entendendo o jogo. Ele está entendendo bem o jogo, está apavorado também.
With like these huge institutions just pressuring us and
pressionando todo mundo.
I feel like this is kind of the right place to be going forward.
What was it like when they were attacking you? Like, first of all, what was the premise? Like, what were they saying was your offense?
Boa noite, Rosilene. Bem-vinda.
Information that was not true, that was getting out there. I know there was also, they're saying that you guys were allowing hate groups to speak. There was a lot of this.
Yeah. I mean, the tough thing with politics is that there's like, well, when you say who someone's coming after you, are you referring to kind of the government and investigations and all that? I mean, so the issue is that there's what specific thing an agency might be looking into you for, and then there's like the underlying political motivation, which is like, why do the people who are running this thing hate you? And I think that those can often be two very different things. So, and we had organizations that were looking into us that were like not really involved with social media, like I think like the CFPB, like this financial. I don't even know what it stands for. It's the financial organization that Elizabeth Warren had set up.
Oh, great!
And it's basically it's like we're not a bank.
The debanking section.
Yeah, no. So like we're not a bank, right? It's like what does Meta have to do with this? But they kind of found some theory that they wanted to investigate, and it's like, okay, clearly they were trying really hard, right, to like find.
Eles criam uma teoria para ter uma desculpa para ficar te investigando e arranjar um motivo para te calar. Basicamente isso que ele tá falando, né? O governo lá é todo mundo cumprindo a mesma agenda, né? Inacreditável, não é diferente daqui do Brasil, né? Como é que pode?
Find some theory, but it like, I don't know, it kind of like throughout the party and the government, there was just sort of, I don't know how this stuff works. I mean, I've never been in government. I don't know if it's like a directive or it's just like a quiet consensus that like, we don't like these guys, they're not doing what we want, we're going to punish them. But it's tough to be at the other end of that.
What was it like?
Well, it's not good. I think, well, the thing that I think is actually the toughest though is it's global, right? So, and really when you think about it, the U.S. government should be defending its companies, right? Not be the tip of the spear attacking its companies. So when we talk about a lot, okay, what is the experience of, okay, if the U.S. government comes after you? I think the real issue is that when the U.S. government does that to its tech industry, it's basically just open season around the rest of the world, right? I mean, the EU, I pulled these numbers. The EU has fined the tech companies more than $30 billion over the last, I think it was like 10 or 20 years.
Bem-vinda, Marigóis.
So when you think about it, like, okay, it's like, $100 million here, a couple $1 billion there. But what it, I think really adds up to is this is sort of like a kind of EU-wide policy for how they want to deal with American tech. It's almost like a tariff. And I think the U.S. government basically gets to decide how are they going to deal with that, right? Because if the U.S. government, if some other country was screwing with another industry that we cared about, the U.S. government would probably find some way to put pressure on them. But I think what happened here is actually the complete opposite. The U.S. government led the kind of attack against the companies, which then just made it so like the EU is basically, and all these other places, just free to just go to town on all the American companies and do whatever you want. But I mean, look, obviously, like I don't want to come across as if like we don't have things that we need to do better. Obviously, we do. And when we mess something up, we deserve to be held accountable for that and just like everyone else. I do think that the American technology industry is a bright spot in the American economy. I think it's a strategic advantage for the United States that we have a lot of the strongest companies in the world. And I think it should be part of the U.S.'s strategy going forward to defend that. And it's one of the...
falando basicamente que esperava que o governo defendesse as empresas americanas, né? Não subjugasse elas e tratasse como está tratando. Ele acha muito estranho o comportamento do governo passado, né? Dos Estados Unidos, Joe Biden, né? Estão acordando aí para a realidade.
One of the things that I'm optimistic about with President Trump is I think he just wants America to win. And I think some of this stuff, like the other governments who are kind of pushing on this stuff, it's like at least the U.S. has the rule of law, right? So the government can come after you for something, but you still get your day in court, and the courts are pretty fair. And so we've basically done a pretty good job of defending ourselves. And when we've chosen to do that, basically we have a pretty good rate of winning. It's just not like that in every other country around the world. Like if other governments decide that they're gonna go after you, you don't always get kind of a clear shake at kind of defending yourself on the rules. So I think to some degree, if the U.S. tech industry is going to continue being really strong, I do think that the U.S. government has a role in basically defending it abroad. And that's one of the things that I'm optimistic about will happen in this administration.
Well, I think this administration uniquely has felt the impact of not being able to have free speech. Because this is the administration where Trump was famously kicked off of Twitter. That was a huge issue. Like after January 6th, like they removed at the time, the sitting president. It was kind of crazy to remove that person from social media because you.
Ele fala do quão absurdo foi o Trump, enquanto presidente, ser expulso, excluído de uma rede social, né? Na época lá, que depois aconteceu o 6 de janeiro, né? Dos Estados Unidos. São coisas que cerceiam a liberdade deles lá. E eles, por estar na Constituição deles, levam muito mais a sério do que a gente a questão da liberdade, né? Como um todo, expressão, ir e vir, enfim, a liberdade, né?
You've decided that he incited a riot. So for him, without free speech, without people, without podcasts, without social media, they probably wouldn't have had a chance because the mainstream narrative, other than Fox News, was so clearly against him. The majority of the television entities and print entities were against him. The majority of them. So
o sistema todo contra o Trump,
né?
Without
podcast, they don't stand a chance. So they're uniquely aware of the importance of giving people their voice, free speech. But you do have to be careful about misinformation, and you do have to be careful about just outright lies and propaganda complaints, or propaganda campaigns, rather. And how do you differentiate?
Well, I think that there are a couple of different things here. One is, this is something where I think X and Twitter just did it better than us on fact-checking. We took the critique around around misinformation, we put in place this fact-checking program.
Falando das verificações, né? De mensagens falsas e fakes nas redes sociais.
I think what Twitter and X have done with community notes, I think is just a better program. Rather than having a small number of fact checkers, you get the whole community to weigh in. When people usually disagree on something,
Boa
tend to
noite,
agree
Jane
and how they're
Martins.
voting on a
Bem-vinda.
note, that's a good sign to the community that there's actually like a broad consensus on this, and then you show it. And you're showing more information, not less, right? So you're not using the fact check as a signal to show less. You're using the community note to provide real context and show additional information. So I think that that's better. For when you're talking about like nation states or people interfering, a lot of that stuff is best rooted out at the level of kind of accounts doing phony things. So you get like, whether it's like China or Russia or Iran or like one of these countries, they'll set up these networks of fake accounts and bots, and they coordinate and they post on each other's stuff to make it seem like it's authentic and kind of convince people it's like, wow, a bunch of people must think this or something. And the way that you identify that is you build AI systems that can basically detect that those accounts are not behaving the way that a human would. And when we find that there's like some bot that's operating an account.
How do you differentiate? How do you figure that out?
It just, I mean, there are some things that a person just would never do, right?
Like,
So,
have you met Lex Friedman?
yes,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
He
And-
might not be.
Well, but is he
Might
going to
not
take?
pass your
But is he
Turing
going to take?
test.
Yeah, no. Is he going to take is he going to make a million actions in a minute? It's
He
like,
might.
yeah, probably not.
Okay, so
Um,
it's that. It's
Well, I mean, it's
things that aren't
more
possible?
subtle than that. I think like
Okay.
these guys are pretty sophisticated, and it's an adversarial space. So, so we find some technique, and then they basically kind of update their techniques. But we have a team of it's effectively like intelligence, counterintelligence folks, counterterrorism folks, AI folks who are building systems to identify what are these accounts that are just not behaving the way that people would, and how are they interacting, and then sometimes you trace it down, and sometimes you get some tips from different intelligence agencies, and then you can kind of piece together over time. It's like, oh, this network of people is actually some kind of fake cluster of accounts, and that's against our policies, and then we just take them all off. But
how are you sure? Like, is there a 100% certainty that you are definitely getting a group of people that are bad actors, or is it just people that have unpopular opinions?
No, I don't think it's that for this. I think.
But what I'm saying is, how
Yeah.
do you determine?
Yeah.
Like, how do you at what percentage of accuracy are you determining it? Do you ever accidentally think that?
Estão debatendo basicamente sobre as IAs trabalhando na regulação, né, de todos as redes sociais do Meta.
People
Yeah.
that are going to get moderated are actually just real people?
Yes, I think for the specific problem around these like large coordinated groups doing kind of like election interference or something, it's a large enough group. We have like a bunch of people analyzing it. It's like they study it for a while. I think we're probably pretty accurate on that. But I actually think one of the bigger issues that we have in our moderation system is this precision issue that you're talking about. And that is actually, of all the things that we announced this week, in terms of how we're going to update the content policies, changing the content filters to have to require higher confidence and precision is actually going to be the thing that reduces the vast majority of the censorship mistakes that we make. Right? Removing the fact checkers and replacing them with community notes, I think it's a good step forward. Like a very small percent of content is fact checked in the first place, so is that going to make the hugest difference? I'm not sure.
Ele falando que basicamente ele acha melhor o sistema agora que o Twitter tinha adotado também, né? Que é o fact check, que é o verificando o fato, né? Deixando uma nota ali embaixo, então, sobre o que é. Daí as pessoas discutem se é verdade, se é não, se não é verdade, enfim, do que censurar, né? Do que acreditar numa IA que pode ocorrer um erro também, né?
I think it'll be a positive step, though. And we like opened up some content policies, so some stuff that was restricted before we opened up. Okay, that's good. It'll mean that some set of things that might have been censored before are not. But by far the biggest set of issues we have, and you and I have talked about a bunch of issues like this over the years, is like, it's just, okay, you have some classifier it's trying to find, say, like drug content, right? People decide, okay, it's like the opioid epidemic is a big deal. We need to do a better job of cracking down on drugs and drug sales, right? I don't want people dealing drugs on our networks. So we build a bunch of systems that basically go out and try to automate finding people who are dealing drugs. And then you basically have this question, which is how precise do you want to set the classifier? So do you want to make it so that the system needs to be
4 milhões de pessoas já viram essa entrevista aqui, hein? Tô vendo aqui. 4 milhões de pessoas. É muita gente. É muita gente. O inglês chega pro mundo todo, né? Ajuda muito isso também, né?
99%
Foi
sure
ontem essa
that
entrevista,
someone
gente.
is dealing drugs before taking them down? Do you want it to be 90% confident, 80% confident? And then those correspond to amounts of, I guess the statistics term would be recall. What percent of the bad stuff are you finding? So if you require 99% confidence, then maybe you only actually end up taking down 20% of the bad content. Whereas if you reduce it and you say, okay, we're only going to require 90% confidence, now maybe you can take down 60% of the bad content. But let's say you say, no, we really need to find everyone who's doing this bad thing. And it doesn't need to be as severe as dealing drugs. It could just be, it could be any kind of content of, any kind of category of harmful content. You start getting to some of these classifiers might have 80, 85% precision in order to get 90% of the bad stuff down. But the problem is if you're at 90% precision, that means 1 out of 10 things that the classifier takes down is not actually problematic. And if you kind of multiply that across the billions of people who use our services every day, that is millions and millions of posts that are basically being taken down that
chegou à conclusão que era muitas pessoas, apesar de ser 10%, isso representando o mundo inteiro, são milhões de pessoas censuradas, né? Milhões e milhões de pessoas, talvez bilhões, né?
Are innocent, and upon
Innocents.
review, we're going to look at it and be like, this is ridiculous that this thing got taken down, which, I think you've had that experience, and we've talked about this for a bunch of stuff over time. And but it really just comes down to this question of where do you want to set the classifiers? So one of the things that we're going to do is basically set them to be require more confidence, which is this trade-off. It's going to mean that we will maybe take down a smaller amount of the harmful content, but it will also mean that we'll dramatically reduce the amount of people whose accounts were taken off for a mistake, which is just a terrible experience, right? It's like, okay, you're going about your day, and then one day you wake up and you're like, oh, my WhatsApp account just got deactivated because it's connected to a Facebook account, and the Facebook account is or like I'm using it on the same phone as a Facebook account where like we made some enforcement mistake and thought you were doing something bad that you weren't because our classifiers were set to too low of precision.
Has that happened before?
Oh yeah.
Where their WhatsApp app got canceled as well?
Yeah, because there are a
so
bunch
if your
of
Facebook app gets taken out, like say if you have a Facebook and you have like a sock puppet account, and the sock puppet account you post offensive memes and you're generally gross.
Yeah.
If you get caught for that, does your WhatsApp get killed?
Not for memes, but go back to like a very severe thing. Like let's say someone is
terrorists. Let's say the most severe.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's say someone is like terrorist content, they're planning some attack.
Right.
Okay, so we take down their account, right? But then let's say that person can just go then sign up with another account. Where I think like,
how does WhatsApp get connected to that though?
Oh, well, if it's, we run these different services, and if they're on the same phone, it's basically, it's one thing that, it's basically regulators or governments will come to us and say, okay, you're clearly not doing enough if you kick someone off for terrorism, and then they can just like sign up for another account on the phone.
Right.
Okay. They also think, okay, well, we're not doing enough if we deactivate their Facebook account because they're like planning a terrorist attack, but we let them use all our other services.
Right. Falando sobre desativar contas
so if our
de
Facebook
Facebook e WhatsApp,
terrorist, then
terroristas
you probably
e tudo.
need to deactivate their access to all the different accounts.
Yeah, they can't get on Threads.
Threads, Instagram, so
that makes sense.
Exatamente, Amanda.
You can understand how you get there, but then you just get to this question around the precision.
É uma das entrevistas mais importantes dos últimos tempos, aí, com certeza.
Mistakes at scale, and it's just unacceptable. But I think it's a very hard calculation of like, where do you want to be? Because on the one hand, like, I get it, why people kind of come to us and they're like, no, you need to do a better job finding more of the terrorism or the drugs and all this stuff. But over time, the technology will get better and it'll get more precise. But at any given point in time, that's the choice that we have to make, is do we want to make more mistakes erring on the side of just like blowing away innocent people's accounts?
Right.
Or do we want to get a somewhat higher percent of the bad stuff off? And I think that there's some balance that you need to strike on this.
We were having a conversation yesterday, Mel Gibson and I, about how that can get weird. Or was it Theo? It might have been Theo. I think it was Theo. Where that can get weird because I think, like, if you're a person and you work at some accounting firm, but you like posting about stuff, but you don't want it to come back and reflect on your life, you want to shit post, you want to post jokes, you want to be silly, you should be able to be anonymous. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think just because you state your opinion, people should be able to search where you sleep. That doesn't make any sense to me. But if you're going to allow anonymous accounts, you're definitely going to open up the door to bad actors
Bem-vindo,
having
Ricardo Amaral.
enormous blocks of accounts where they can use either AI or just programs where they have like specific answers. I'm sure you've seen that before. It's come up on Twitter multiple times where they've found hundreds of sock puppet accounts tweeting the exact same thing. So you've literally word for word, even certain words in caps, like either people are copy or pasting it, or there's an email campaign that's getting legitimate people to do it, or these are fake people. You're going to have, if you're going to have anonymous accounts, which I think you should, because I think whistleblowers, I think the benefits of anonymous reporting on important things that the general public needs to know about, especially whistleblower type stuff, you have to have some ability to be anonymous. But if you're going to do that, you're also going to have the possibility that these aren't real people, that these are paid actors, these are paid people, or not people at all, or they're running programs, and they're doing this to try to sway public opinion about very important issues.
Bem-vindo, Marcelo Amaral. Boa noite, bem-vindo e gratidão por se inscrever aqui no canal.
I mean, so there's the anonymous
Valeu
accounts.
mesmo o
Also,
apoio.
just over time, I think a lot of the kind of more interesting conversations have shifted from the public sphere to more private ones. So WhatsApp groups, private groups on Facebook. I'm sure you have this experience where maybe 10 years ago you would have posted your kind of quick takes on whatever social media you were using. Now, the stuff that I post on Facebook and Instagram, it's like I put time into making sure that that's kind of good content that I want to be seen broadly.
Yeah.
And then like most of the jokes that I make are like with my friends in WhatsApp, right? In groups. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's kind of where the world is more broadly now.
Não vi lugar nenhum reagindo à entrevista completa. Só vi o pessoal falando dos cortes, né? Claro, são pontos importantes e tal, mas eu acho interessante ver a entrevista completa, porque a gente tem uma noção muito maior, né, do que algumas notícias que a gente vê, principalmente de portais de notícias tradicionais aqui do Brasil, né? Não dá pra confiar. A verdade é essa.
Yeah. No, I think so for jokes, for that kind of stuff, for comedians for sure. Because also, we'll say things that we don't really mean. We just say it because it's a funny thing to say.
I think everyone does.
For sure. Yeah. Which is just a weird thing about taking things out of context, particularly on social media.
Boa noite, Will Pacheco. Bem-vindo à live. Gratidão pela presença, irmão. Valeu demais.
Let's just say that you're a country that's involved in some sort of an international conflict, and you have this ability to get out this fake narrative and just spread it widely about all sorts of things you're accusing this other government of, all sorts of things that aren't true.
Yeah.
And it just muddies the water of reality for a lot of people.
Deve ter muita segurança, né?
That side of things, the kind of
Opa, o pessoal se inscrevendo aí. Valeu demais.
Campaigns. I mean, we're not letting
Marcelo Amaral, bem-vindo ao canal.
Most categories of bad stuff that we're policing, everyone agrees is bad, right? No one's sitting there defending that terrorism is good. Right, or child exploitation, or drugs, or IP violations, or people inciting violence, or it's like most of the stuff is bad. People clearly believe that
Não deixe de votar na enquete aí rolando na live, viu? Nos comentários ao vivo aí. Final da live a gente vê o resultado.
This is the type of stuff that the vast majority of our energy goes towards that, and we're not changing our approach on any of that. The two categories that I think have been very politicized are misinformation, because who gets to judge? what's false and what's true. You may just not like my opinion on something, and then people think it's false, but I think that one's really tricky. And the other one is basically what people refer to as hate speech, which is, I think, also comes from a good place of wanting to crack down on that, of wanting to promote more inclusion and belonging, and people feeling good, and like having a pluralistic society that can basically have all these different communities coexist.
Accept everyone. Yeah.
But I think the problem is that all these things are on a spectrum, and when you go too far on them, I think on that side we just basically got to this point where there were these things that you just like couldn't say, which were mainstream discourse, right? So it's like Pete Hegseth is going to probably be
basicamente tinha lugar para todo mundo já nas redes sociais, mas eles estavam cerceando geral, né?
One of the points that he's made
não estava sendo mais inclusivo, né?
In certain combat roles, and until we updated our policies, that wouldn't have been a thing that you could have said on our platforms, because it would call for the exclusion of a protected category of people. And it's like, okay, like on its face, yeah, calling for the exclusion of a protected category, that seems that like that's okay, there's like legal protections, there's all this stuff, but okay, if it's like okay to say on the floor of Congress, you should probably be able to debate it on social media. Yeah. So I think some of the stuff, I think well-intentioned, went too far, needs to just get rationalized a bit. But it's those two categories, misinformation and hate speech, I think.
Eles estão falando abertamente sobre tudo, né? Sem censura.
All the other ones, which is the vast majority of the stuff that we do, is I think people generally agree that it's good and we need to go after it. But then you just get into
já falaram da panda, de vacina.
Okay, well, what confidence level do people want us to have
de picadinha.
In our enforcement? And at
Nem
what
devia
point
ter
would people
falado.
rather us kind of say, okay, I'm not sure that's that one is causing an issue. So on
vacina
balance,
para
maybe
panda,
we should
animal.
just, leave that person's account out,
Viu
because the pain of just nuking someone's account when you're not sure or you make a mistake is like, that's pretty real too.
Right. Yeah. Very, very complicated.
Yeah.
It's all very nuanced.
Exclusão em vez de inclusão, né?
You made a point earlier about the
só da boca para fora enquanto eles faziam o contrário.
Supporting its companies. That it would be a good thing for the government to support its companies. It makes sense. It's an American company. I think the issue that we're dealing with is companies, as we're describing them, have never existed before. Right? There's never been a thing like Facebook before. There's never been a thing like Twitter before, or X. There's never been a
As
thing
pessoas estão
like
tendo muita voz,
These are new things.
Coisa que não existia antes. Por isso que os governos estão preocupados.
On society, on opinions, on conversations, on distribution of information. There's never been a thing.
A gente finalmente
like
tem liberdade de verdade, né?
So it makes sense from their perspective, continuing the patterns of behavior that they've always exhibited, which is to have control over the media.
Valeu, Marigóis. Boa noite.
CIA operatives that have been in major newspapers forever. There's always been that. There's always been this sort of input that the government had in mainstream media narratives. They are in a position now where they're losing that. They've essentially lost it. And especially with this the push during COVID deteriorated, as you were saying before, the opinion and the respect that people have for the facts that are coming from mainstream journalism in a way that I've never seen before in my life, where an enormous percentage of the population does not trust mainstream media anymore. So, well, what do they trust? They trust social media. Well, who's running that? Well, there are a bunch of people who figured it out and invented it. Well, no, fuck that. Like, we got to crack down on that. Like, we've got to get our hands on this, which is what we saw during COVID, which we saw during the Biden administration's attempt to remove the Hunter Biden laptop story from Twitter and from all these different things that we saw happen, the way they contacted you guys, what they're trying to do with getting you to remove real information about vaccine side effects, like that. This is like this new attempt to crack down on this new thing, which is a distribution outlet that's far more successful than anything they've ever controlled before, and they have no control of it. Right? They had CBS, they had NBC, they had when they had the New York Times and all these Washington Post, when they were in control of narrative.
Todos perderam espaço, né? Os jornais tradicionais, a televisão.
There wasn't some sort of
Isso é preocupante para o sistema, né?
that came on and said, hey guys, look, here's the latest studies that shows this is not true. Here's why they're lying about that.
Isso é preocupante para o sistema.
And now that's what you get all day long on X. It's all day long is like dissolving illusions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
dissolvendo
a
ilusões.
thing that probably led to Trump getting elected.
Yeah, I mean the causality there is tricky, but because there's a lot of things. I mean,
there's a lot of things.
I mean, it's
but without it, he probably doesn't get elected.
It's tough to know. I mean, I do come back to this point that there were every major incumbent lost.
O Joe Rogan acho que sem essa liberdade nas redes, talvez o Trump não fosse reeleito, né, ou eleito, né?
Revealing how kind of incorrect and dishonest I think some of these governments were.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's quite possible. And
Parado no tempo, né, Ana, cada vez. Parado no tempo.
É
pra gente parar no tempo, né?
Não somente people who are in these like culturally elite positions, and journalists, TV news anchors, like who are the people who people broadly trust, right? They're not all in government. They're like a lot of people in other positions. It's like who are the people that basically people look to, and I think that's basically it needs to shift for the internet age, and I think a lot of the people who people look to before, they're kind of realizing, hey, they weren't super honest about a lot of these issues that we face, and I think that's partially why social media isn't a monolithic thing. It's not that people trust Facebook or X; they trust the creators and the voices that they feel like are being authentic.
As redes sociais não são monopólio, né?
So
são vozes das pessoas, né?
Just this whole new class of creators who basically become the new kind of cultural elites that people look at and are like, okay, these are the people who give it to me straight. And I think that's a thing that is maybe it's possible because of social media. I think it's also just the internet more broadly. I mean, I think podcasting is obviously a huge and important part of that too. I mean, I don't know to what extent you feel like you kind of got to be large, like because of social media or just the podcasting platforms that you used. But I think that this is like a very big sea change in terms of like who are the voices that matter. And what we do is we try to build a platform that gives people a voice. But I think that there's this wholesale generational shift in who are the people who are being listened to. And I think that that's like a very fascinating thing that is going on, because I think that that's like what's going on here. It's not just the government and people saying, hey, we want like a very big change here. I think it's just like a wholesale shift in saying we just want different people who we actually trust,
right?
Who are actually going to like tell us the truth and not give us like the bullshit opinions that you're supposed to say, but like the type of stuff that I would actually like when I'm sitting in my living room with my friends, like the stuff that we know is true. Like who are the people who kind of have the courage to actually just say that stuff? I don't know. I think that whole like cultural elite class needs to get repopulated with people who people actually trust.
Yeah. The problem is these people that are starting these jobs, they're coming out of universities, and in the universities they're indoctrinated into these ideas as well. It's very difficult to be a person who stands outside of that and takes unpopular positions. You get socially ostracized, and people are very hesitant to do that, and they would rather just keep their mouth shut and talk about it in quiet conversation. And that's what we experience, which is another argument for anonymous accounts. I think you should have anonymous accounts. I think you should be able, like, if there's something like COVID mandates or some things that you're dealing with and you don't want to get fired because of it, you should be able to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And you should be able to post facts and information and what you've learned. And, anecdotal experiences of people in your family that had vaccine side effects, and not worry about losing your job, which people were worried about, which is so crazy. And, and you're seeing a lot of the people that used to be in mainstream media got fired, and now they're trying to do the sort of podcast thing, but they're trying to do
pessoas
it
das mídias
like
tradicionais
media person. So they're like gaslighting during
foram pro
podcasts,
espaço
and people are like, hey, fuckface.
de conversa real, franca, verdadeira, né, que é a internet.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, it's a new medium. I mean, I'm sure you know the history on this. It's like when people transition from radio to TV, the initial TV anchors were the same radio
Zuckerberg
people,
pegou bem a
but just,
transição
like, being filmed
rádio,
while
TV e da
speaking on the
TV
radio.
agora
But
para
it
as redes
turned out it
sociais,
actually
quer
was a
dizer,
completely
para a
different
internet
type of
geralmente,
person.
como
On your radio,
todo,
it's
né?
just like your
O
voice
YouTube,
and your
enfim,
cadence
tudo.
and all of that. It's like, the whole phrase, it's like you've got a good radio voice, right? It's like, okay, on TV, you need to be telegenic, right? You need to kind of have charisma in that medium. It's like a completely different thing. And I think that's going to be true for the internet too. It's, it's not as cut, right? I think part of it is the format, right? The fact that you do these like 2-3 hour episodes. I mean, I hated doing TV because, I basically I started Facebook when I was 19, and I was good at some things, very bad at others. I was good at coding and like real bad at kind of like talking to people and explaining what I was doing. And I just like had these experiences early on where I'd go on TV and like it wouldn't go well, and they'd cut it to down to some random soundbite, and I'd like look stupid, and then basically like I'd get super nervous about like going on TV because I knew that they were just going to cut it in some way that I was going to look like a fucking idiot. and so I'm just like, this sucks, right? So I just like, it's kind of a funny thing about like, it's like, in some ways it's like, okay, at the same time I was, gaining confidence, being able to like build more and more complicated products, and it's like even as an early 20s
falando da
person,
dificuldade
I was like,
dele,
this.
né,
And then on the kind of
aparecer
TV
na
and comms
televisão,
public side, I was like,
mídia
this is a
tradicional.
disaster. Every time I go out, it's worse and worse and worse. And
Ele
it just makes
parecia
sense.
idiota, então.
But I mean, it's one of the reasons why I think on the internet, like, there's no reason to cut it to a 4-minute soundbite conversation. It's like, I think part of what makes it authentic is like, we can just, I mean, these are complex issues. We can unpack it for hours and probably still have hours more stuff to talk about. It just, it's, I
A
don't
internet
know.
é mais
I think it's
tranquila,
just more real.
qualquer fica livre, né,
definitely
falar do
that.
jeito que
And
quer,
the other
usar o
thing
meio que
about
quiser.
television that's always going to hold it back is the fact that every conversation gets interrupted every X amount of minutes because you have to cut to a commercial. So you really can't get into depth. Even Bill Maher's show is only an hour. You have all these people talking over each other, then you sit down with one person for a short amount of time. It's just not enough time for important subjects. It's also, a lot of them, for whatever reason, want to do it in front of an audience, which is the worst way to get people to talk. Like, when you imagine these disasters that you had if there was like 5,000 people staring at you in a TV crowd as well.
Yeah.
So there's that added element, which is so not normal and
Yeah.
not conducive to having a conversation where you're talking
Sim.
about nuanced things.
A internet,
Where you have to,
tu
like, think,
interage com o
you
teu
have to be able to
público, né?
pause and-
Por isso
and
que o
not
pessoal da
concern
TV
yourself
gostou
being
também de
in
migrar
bikini
pra internet.
in front of
Né?
these fucking people just sitting there staring at you.
É muito mais rápido, é direto,
Yeah, and also like when you're having a conversation, it like,
tranquilo,
I
né?
don't know, it's like when you start talking about something, your kind of subconscious kicks in, you start thinking about the topic. So it's like you might not actually have the thing that you want to say until like 5 minutes later.
Right,
And
right.
I mean, it's like when we started this conversation, I think like the first few minutes were like just kind of slow. It's like warming up. Like,
Yep.
I'm like, okay, kind of like downloading into my memory. Like how am I going to like, it's like, how am I going to, just explain these different things. But it's, I just think that's sort of how people work.
What's also like, conversations are like a dance. One person can't be dancing at another speed and the other person's going slow. Like, you kind of have to find the rhythm that you're going to talk with. And then you have to actually be interested in what you're talking about. That's another thing that they are at a huge disadvantage of in mainstream media. Is like, they're just doing that because that's their job. They probably don't even know a lot about climate change. They probably don't really understand too much about what SpaceX is trying to accomplish, but they're just reporting on it.
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, I'm sure there's... And a lot of the people I've met there, I think, are good people.
I'm
It's
sure
just
they
a
are.
tough format.
It's
right?
a
tough
terrible format. Yeah, and the problem is they get locked into that format and no one trusts them. And then they leave and they go, yeah, but you were just
Falando que tem
lying to us
pessoas
about
legais na
this, that,
televisão, o
and the
problema é o
other thing.
formato,
And
né?
now I'm supposed to believe you're one of the good guys. You're one of the straight shooters now.
Yeah.
Well, getting back to the original point, this is why I think, it makes sense to me that the government didn't want you to succeed and to have the sort of unchecked power that they perceived social media to have. And I think one of the benefits that we have now of the Trump administration is that they have clearly felt the repercussions of a limited amount of free speech limitations, censorship,
Isso aí.
government overreach. If anybody saw it,
A necessidade de ter liberdade de expressão, tudo isso agitou esse governo novo do Trump.
Of the Hunter Biden laptop story would have been, I don't know. But there's many people that think it probably amounted to millions of votes overall in the country, of people that were on the fence, the people that weren't sure who they're going to vote for. If they found out the Hunter Biden laptop was real, they're like, oh, this is fucking, the family's fucking crazy. And they would have voted for Trump. That's possibly real. And if that's possibly real, that could be defined as election interference. And all that stuff scares the shit out of me. That kind of stuff scares the shit out of me. When the government gets involved in what could be termed election interference, but through some
Interferência eleitoral, eles estão comentando agora.
it's legal.
Lá nos Estados Unidos.
Well, I don't think
Pode
that
ter
the
mexido nas
pushing
eleições de lá.
for social media companies to censor stuff was legal. I mean, it's like that's. I
Right.
mean, there's all this stuff about what, like, people talk about the First Amendment and okay, these tech platforms should offer free speech.
Estão
like the
tocando em
First Amendment.
assuntos aí que eu vou te dizer, hein?
That I think is a philosophical principle. The First Amendment doesn't apply to
Nem sei como é que o
companies
YouTube
in our
deixa ter
content
esse tipo de
moderation. It's more of
conteúdo
an
aí.
American ethos about how we think that best dialogue is carried out, but the First Amendment does apply to the government. That's like the whole point, right? Is the
Right.
government is not allowed to censor this stuff. So, at some level, I do think that having people in the administration calling up the guys on our team and yelling at them and cursing and threatening repercussions if we don't take down things that are true is like, it's pretty bad.
It sounds illegal. I
Pretty
would
bad.
love to hear it. I wish somebody recorded those conversations.
Well, I mean,
Those would be
again,
fucking
it's well
great to listen to. Somebody could animate them, maybe Polytune.
The
Animate-
a lot of the material is public. I mean, it's Jim Jordan led this whole investigation in Congress. I mean, it was basically, I think about this as like, what Elon did on the Twitter files when he took over that company. I think Jim Jordan basically did that for the rest of the industry with the congressional investigation that he did, and we just turned over like all of the documents and everything that we had.
Twitter Files, falando do Elon Musk levando tudo no Congresso americano. Abriu a caixa de Pandora. É isso mesmo, Diego.
What was the response to all this?
To what?
Estão falando de
to
tudo
the
aqui, hein?
investigation?
Yes.
I don't know.
Isso a mídia não vai mostrar. Não
Was
vai
anybody
mostrar.
held accountable? Was there any repercussions?
I mean, they lost the election.
Yes. So that's it.
That's it. Well, in a democracy, I mean, that's kind of right.
Right, but if what they did was illegal, do you not think that some steps should be put in place to make sure that people are punished for that and that never happens again? It seems that has a massive impact on the way our country goes. If that's election interference, and I think it is, that has a massive impact on the direction of our country.
Yeah, well, the COVID thing I don't think was election interference as much as it was just like government meddling where it shouldn't have. But yeah,
Right.
no, I mean, it's
I'm
it's tougher,
talking about
it's
the Hunter
tough-
Biden
tougher
laptop
for me
story.
to say, like what specific retribution or justice should happen to anyone who is involved in these things. But I think your point about let's make sure this doesn't happen again
Yeah.
is the one that I'm more focused on, right?
Right.
Because it's the thing that I reflect on my journey on all this, which is like, okay,
Ele falou que está o mais focado que ele está agora é que não aconteça interferências nas eleições. Ele está preocupado com isso, hein? O Zuckerberg está preocupado com isso, ele falando. Eles vão trabalhar para que não aconteça isso, né? Então já viu o governo Trump, ele e o Elon Musk vão talvez mudar o sistema eleitoral lá, ou enfim, garantir que seja real, né?
yeah, so we didn't take down the stuff that was true, but we did generally defer to the government on some of these policies.
Marcela Amaral,
that in
bem-vinda à live aí,
retrospect, I probably
gratidão.
wouldn't, knowing what I know now. And I just think that's sort of the journey that we've been on. Is like,
É isso aí.
okay, we start the thing focused on free expression, go through some like pretty crazy times in the world, get it pressure tested, see where we basically ended up doing stuff that led to a slippery slope that we weren't happy with the conclusion, and like try to reset. And that's sort of the moment that we're at now, is trying to just rationalize a bunch of the policies. And look, I mean, obviously crazy things can happen in the future that might unearth something that I haven't some kind of angle on this that I haven't thought enough about yet. So I don't know. I'm sure I'm not done making mistakes in the world, but I think at this point we have a much more thorough understanding of what the space is, and I think our kind of values and principles on this are likely going to be much more durable going forward. And I think that's probably a good thing for the internet.
I think it's a great thing for the internet. I was very happy with your announcement. I'm very happy that you took those steps. I'm very happy you brought
Ele falou que tá muito feliz do posicionamento do
Been talking to him for a while about that.
Zuckerberg.
I mean, he's like, talk about like an amazing entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I just want, like, because I control our company, I have the benefit of not having to convince the board not to fire me, right? It's like a normal corporate environment. It's like basically the CEO just tries to like, they're just trying to convince the board to like let them have their job and pay them more. It's like, all right, the board doesn't pay me except for security, and I'm not worried about losing my job because I control the majority of the voting in the company. So I actually get to use our board to like have the smartest people who I can get to have around me help work on these problems. So it's like, all right, who are the people I want? Like, I just want like the best entrepreneurs and people who've created different things. And like, I mean, Dana's like this guy who, I mean, he basically took the sport from being this, like, I think it was viewed as like this pretty marginal
Valeu,
thing when he got
Troxid,
started,
bem-vindo
right?
aí.
John
Valeu
McCain
pelo
was
apoio,
trying to
irmão.
outlaw it,
Tamo
and,
junto.
Yeah.
Daniel.
And, now it's like, I think it and F1 are the two fastest growing sports in the world. It's got hundreds of millions of people viewing it. It's like, I mean, what Dana's done with the UFC is like one of the most legendary business stories, and the brand is beloved. And I think he's just so he's like a world-class entrepreneur, and he's just like he's got a strong backbone. And I think part of what the conversation that I had with him around joining our board was, okay, like we have a lot of governments and folks around the world putting a lot of pressure on our company, and like we need some like strong people who are going to basically help advise us on how to handle some of these situations. And so yeah. That's but yeah, I mean, running this company is not for the faint of heart. I mean, there's definitely a lot of pressure from like all these
Ele
different
falando
governments.
como gerir uma empresa
I spend all my time doing that, but I'm not
que não é nada fácil e tal.
I just want to
Ainda mais com o governo incomodando o tempo todo.
So yeah, I think Dana's going to be great.
He's the best.
Great entrepreneur.
I agree with everything you said about him. Without him, none of the UFC would have ever taken place the way it did. I mean, you needed the Fertitta brothers. They had to come in with all the money and the vision. And it's really funny because Eddie Bravo and I, we've been fans for so long. Eddie Bravo and I went to a live event in the 90s. I was working for the UFC as a backstage interviewer, and he went there with Ricky Rocket. You know Ricky Rocket from Poison?
No.
He's a fucking black belt under the Machados.
Huh.
He's legit. Super legit. Really nice guy, too. Anyway, so Ricky Rocket and him were at the UFC, and we were talking about it in the 90s.
Como é bom a gente ver uma conversa franca, né? Sem interrupções, sem ter que ter uma pauta. Simplesmente estão conversando como dois amigos ali, trocando ideias sobre tudo, sem censura, sem nada, né? É assim que deveria ser, né? Parece tão simples, né? Mas o sistema não quer isso.
He's like, you know what the sport needs? Because we were in love with it. We're like this, but we were martial artists. We were like, the sport needs some billionaires who just throw a ton of money at it and just get it huge. And then the Fertitta brothers come along, billionaires with a ton of money who are huge fans of the sport, just love the sport. We're hiring people like Frank Shamrock to come in and train them and work out, and we're taking jiu-jitsu with John Lewis, and they were really getting into it. And so then they buy the UFC for like $2 million, which is probably the greatest purchase ever, except they were $40+ million in the hole when they financed the Ultimate Fighter. And then that was 2005, and then this one fight takes place with Stephen.
A gente não vê isso na televisão nunca.
On
nunca vai ver
it's
isso na
so
televisão.
wild and so crazy that millions of people start tuning in. The sport's born. Then you have Chuck Liddell, who was the champion at the time, who was the most fan-friendly champion you could ever have, just a fucking berserker, with just a psychopath with a fucking head tattoo and a mohawk, crushing people. In his prime, he was the perfect poster guy for the UFC because he was just smashing people and then throwing his arms back like rah, in a cage. It was nuts.
Tô falando sobre o UFC, os empresários da luta e tal.
It was just the whole thing took off, but without Dana, it would have never taken place. The guy's tireless. That man,
yeah,
it's incredible.
Well, we're lucky to have some of it.
Yeah, we are. And you know what?
Ah,
We're
e
also
o-
lucky that you got into jiu-jitsu. Because
E ele luta jiu-jitsu, né? Se eu não me engano.
You look different. When you walked in here today, you look
O
thicker.
Zuckerberg.
You look like a different guy. You do. You look like a jiu-jitsu guy now. It's funny. I saw your neck. I'm like, his neck's bigger.
Falando que ele
Your neck is
parece
bigger.
mais saudável,
Good. Are
melhor.
you using
Tudo.
iron neck or is it just from
I
training?
do like Iron Neck, but it's but when I started training not just jiu-jitsu but striking, I was like, all right, I want to find a way to do this where I don't like hurt my brain, right? It's like, all right, like I need to. I'm going to be running this company for a while. I would like to, you know, like stay healthy
Mari.
and not take too much damage. And so I think the number one thing you need
As
to do
artes
is,
marciais
in addition to having
salvam
good
as pessoas, viu,
partners,
gente? É
is
muito bom.
have a strong neck.
Yes.
So yeah, no, I take that pretty seriously.
It's very important. A strong
Yeah.
neck is great for jiu-jitsu as well because it's a weapon. Like
Yeah.
in certain
Yeah.
positions, like head,
Head
and
and
arm
arm.
chokes.
Yeah, head and
it's
arm.
you
Yeah.
need a neck.
Yeah.
It's a weapon.
Yeah.
And you know, and also for defending things and just for overall stability. But for striking, it's very like Mike Tyson in his prime. Yeah.
I was doing general fitness or kind of MMA. I do sometimes grappling, sometimes striking.
Tô falando da
sometimes both.
importância aí
But,
de praticar alguma coisa e tal.
Like, what do you expect? You're like, I was in my late 30s at the time, but she was like, no. She's like, when you heal your ACL, you better go back to fighting. And I'm like, what do you mean?
Tinha
She's
40
like,
anos na época,
you
então
are
ele é
so
bem
much
mais
better
velho.
to be around.
That's a good thing to know. It's a good thing to
Know that you have this kind of physical ability. It's if he's doing well in a tournament, that's like, all right, fine, sign me up, right? It's like
Fine now,
Yeah,
but
I
obviously
mean-
it's a long time ago.
Yeah, I can kind of do everything that I want at this point. It's still like a little sore, but I don't know. I think that it's supposed to be a couple of years until you like feel like it's fully.
Legal
I think
esse
it takes some time
depoimento do
to
Zuckerberg,
grow
né?
into it and all that.
Did you incorporate peptides in your recovery?
I didn't.
Do you hate healing?
Do I hate healing? No.
Why didn't you use peptide? These different slant board squats and different lunge.
I need to figure this out because I don't know how with everything that's going on in AI, I'm gonna have like a week or two
Inteligência
where I can
artificial.
just get into this like I'm gonna go fight someone. But it's good. It's good training. But I would like to at some point. You know, the thing about the ACL injury is I kind of thought before this. It's like, all right, I'm gonna do.
A series of other athletes is nothing short of extraordinary.
Like celebrates the aggression a bit more. So for a while, my daughters were pretty convinced that my actual job was Mark's Meats, which is our kind of ranch.
Do you know how old it is?
No, it's not old.
Okay.
I think it's like a
iPod or something where you have a good steady. It's much easier. With a bow, it's very different because you're holding it with your arm, so you have to a shot execution process and also management of the psychology of the shot. Because there's this one moment. Here it comes.
Yeah.
Here it comes now.
Mhm.
And if you only do that once a year, like say if you go on one big elk hunt a year, you save up all your money, you get your gear all ready, you get your arrows
A importância
weighed,
de
practice,
praticar
and then you're in the
sobrevivencialismo, né?
mountains for 10 days, and on the
Caça,
11th day,
aprender a atirar,
you get
tudo.
this animal that moves is at 57 yards.
Legal
and
esse
stand-
papo
so
deles
like
aí.
just like I'm usually faster at taking down all the bowling pins with a bow and arrow than most of my friends are with the pistol, which I think is pretty fun. But yeah, no, I mean just more casual. I'm clearly not doing it at your level, and maybe you've given me another side quest to maybe go deeper on. But
That's what I'm saying.
but
I'll take
I think
you on
I'm-
an elk hunt in the mountains.
yeah,
You'll get addicted.
I
want to think about
I do think the
something crazy?
dynamic that you're talking about, though, where if you only see one animal on a multi-day, then like that is just way higher stakes than anything that I'm
Mhm.
doing. I mean, that's
But
like
it's
creative. That's maybe like a richer form of what you would have been doing physically.
Right.
But if you're a younger teen, then you have to get your parents' permission, and they actually have to like sign in and do all the stuff in order to make it so that you can connect with people who are beyond your network, or if you want to kind of be a public figure, like all these different kinds of things. So I think that that's probably, from a values perspective, where we should be, is just trying to like be an ally of parents. But this is complicated stuff. I mean, it's every family wants to do it differently.
It is complicated, and there's also this dismissal of activities that are done electronically as not being beneficial. And one of the things that we highlighted recently was a study that we found online that showed that surgeons that play video games make far less mistakes.
Olha aí,
Yeah.
cirurgiões que jogam videogame têm menos erros, mostrando a importância dos videogames aí. Legal. Essa eu não esperava.
Well, the people who do the training in VR definitely make less mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that is
O VR, que é a realidade virtual, aqueles óculos também, treinando, né, por ali.
You know, when you and I were doing that game, we were fencing with each other. I'm like, this could be applied to so many different things now. It's like there's so many opportunities, not just for just pure recreation, but education. There's so many things you could learn, skills.
Falando de usar isso tudo para ensinamento, né, para as crianças se atraírem pelas escolas e tudo, né?
I mean, it's kind of a cheat code in a lot of ways, and it's also games in VR. I don't know if you ever done Sandbox. You ever do Sandbox?
Which
do you know
one?
what Sandbox VR? Do you know what that company is?
Yeah.
You go to a warehouse, you put on a haptic feedback vest, you shoot zombies. I'm so addicted. I'm so addicted. It is my favorite thing. There's a thing called Deadwood Mansion. It's the most fun game of all time, by far. You have a shotgun,
Deadwood Mansion, ele falando, ele falando do jogo preferido dele de VR, de realidade virtual.
It's you just like it can be multiplayer and there's horde mode where you just get in there and
Papo gamer agora rolando.
4 friends and there's just like waves of zombies come and you.
Olha aí que legal, Anny Santos.
Yeah, I have to try it.
Pois é, tem muito ensinamento, né?
Deixa
eu até pausar aqui, tem muito ensinamento. Eu aprendi muito de inglês por causa dos jogos. Foi tudo, basicamente, de inglês que eu sei por causa de jogar um jogo totalmente em inglês, pegar o dicionário ali e ir traduzindo aos pouquinhos. Aprendi muita coisa nos jogos, muita coisa. Então, realmente, claro, tudo tem um limite ali para não ultrapassar, né? Tudo que a gente for fazer demais faz mal, né? Mas os jogos realmente ajudaram muito a minha geração e as outras aí por vir. Imagina as crianças que cresceram jogando Minecraft, né? Eu já era adolescente para mais quando saiu Minecraft. Então vocês imaginem quem cresceu com Minecraft, né? Já aprendendo sobre fissão nuclear, tinha mods de criação de animais, trabalho com energia nuclear, um monte de coisa, gente, aquilo ali é incrível. Isso ajudou as crianças a conhecerem seus dons, né? A conhecerem algo fora do espectro normal da escola, né? Que é sempre aquela mesma coisa batida, né? Isso é importante para as crianças. Né?
It's very therapeutic. You just wait until they come into point blank range.
How long before you guys develop some sort of a haptic feedback suit where like it covers the whole body?
Oh man.
Is that possible?
It's possible. I think that there's other things that are probably more important to deliver. So, I guess taking a step back. A lot of how we think about the goal
Fora a
here
interação
is
com outras pessoas, que às
like
vezes
a
a pessoa é
realistic sense of
envergonhada, né?
presence.
Aprende
No
também
technology today
jogando.
gives you the feeling as if you're like physically there with another person, right? You're like interacting with them through a phone. You have this like little window. It's kind of taking you away from everything.
Isso aqui que eu faço com vocês eu fazia quando era criança. Eu brincava que tinha uma rede de
Augmented
televisão.
virtual reality is like you actually feel this. Like,
eu jogava
presence, like, you're there with
videogame.
another person. And
Right.
So the question is, okay, how do you do that? And it's like there's like a million things that contribute to that. I mean, obviously, first, just being able to look around and have the room stay. Getting good spatial audio, right? If someone speaks, then it should do the audio. It needs to be 3D and come from the place where they're speaking. It's very interesting which things end up being important for this kind of creating this sense of presence and which don't. So having hands, obviously, if you're just looking around but you can't actually like move things, that breaks the illusion. But having hands, like hand tracking that you can do stuff is important. One thing that we found that's kind of funny is it's actually not that important that you see your arms. You just need to see your hands. Obviously, seeing your arms is a bonus, unless we incorrectly
Eles falando
interpolate where
sobre
your
a criação da realidade virtual, né? Os elementos ali.
Or if we have a controller, we can know, okay, your hand is here. But that doesn't necessarily tell us where your elbow is. Your elbow could be like this, it could be like this, so you can kind of guess from
De
that.
ter a noção de ter a mão já dá noção do corpo
and you
inteiro.
like see
Né?
in VR, it's like you see
Legal,
the hand there, your elbow is like looks like it's here when it's actually out there. You're like, what's going on? Like that's messed up. So it's a lot of these things like you just don't want to get these
Que
details
legal.
wrong. So
Que legal,
haptics,
né? Muitas
the most
pessoas se
important
conhecendo.
first thing for haptics is on the hand, right? I mean, we have so many more the neurons basically, or not neurons, but just like the like sensation. It's like such higher resolution on your fingertips than anywhere else in the body. So, you know, when you
Bem-vindo à
grab
live aí,
something,
Val.
you know, making it so that you feel some
Meu primeiro jogo
pushback,
foi
right? When
Ragnarok, e lá
there's a lot of
tinha
gaming
IAdos
systems at this point where if you, like, pull a
homúnculos.
trigger, you get,
E
like, a
eu
little
aprendi
of a rumble or
a
something.
editar IA. Tem uns
We built this
25
one
anos.
thing where
Ragnarok
it's like a
é
ping pong
fantástico.
paddle
Um dos
with a
melhores
sensor in
RPGs
it,
já feitos.
and
Se não o.
you feel
Online, no caso, né?
the ball hit, like the virtual ball hitting the ping pong paddle, and it feels like when you're actually playing ping pong, it doesn't.
Tentaram
It's not like a
recriá-lo
generic
várias
thing
vezes e
where
não
it's just like you
conseguiram.
feel it hit the paddle. You feel where it hits the paddle, and we basically built a system where now with this like
Bem-vinda,
physical
Luciana.
paddle,
Bem-vinda à live. Gratidão
you
pela
can
presença.
kind of it.
Valeu.
The haptics make it so you can feel where the ball hits the paddle.
Fantástico
So it's like all
mesmo.
these things like.
Eu sempre
are just
gostei de
going
jogos de
towards
tiro com
delivering a more
história,
realistic
jogos de
experience.
aventura também.
So, full body haptics.
Tiro em primeira pessoa
So,
são os meus
There are
favoritos.
some things that I think it could do, like if you're playing a boxing game, you get punched in the
Sobrevivência.
stomach.
Eu gosto muito de DayZ. Já ouviram falar
You
DayZ?
can
Tem várias lives aqui no
probably
canal.
simulate something
Na época que
like
o canal
that
era
a
só
little.
sobre games.
It's not going to be able to deliver that much force, so I mean, I guess that's maybe a good thing because no one wants to get
Right.
punched in the
DayZ é um
stomach that hard.
simulador de sobrevivência no apocalipse zumbi.
But like,
É o melhor já feito até
it's not
hoje.
going to be able to deliver enough force for you to, for example, let's say you're not just boxing, you're kickboxing. Like, I don't know, you need something on the other side to be able to complete it, right? Because it's like when you kick, when you're just practicing, it's like you spin, right? Because you don't want to just like stop, and it's that's like the shadowing a kick. Like, there's not going to be anything that you can do as like a single person playing VR with a haptic suit that like makes it so that you're going to be able to kick someone who's not there physically and actually be able to do that.
Right.
So like grappling, it's like I think that like jiu-jitsu is going to be the last thing that we're able to do in VR because you like need the momentum of the other person and to be able to move them.
The boxing thing is actually good.
Boxing works.
Yeah.
Boxing works. And you don't
Boxe
really need the
funciona
haptics.
melhor
I think it would be better with
no
it.
realidade virtual.
That's probably one of the better cases. I think it's that and getting shot or like sword fighting type stuff. So you can like just feel it on your body.
Por enquanto, né?
But I don't know. I think what's basically going to end up happening is you're going to have like a home setup for these things, and then you're going to have there are these like location-based services where like people. It's almost like a theme park where you can go into and you can have like a really immersive VR experience where it's not just that you get like a vest that can simulate some haptics. It's that you're also like in a real physical environment, so they can like have smoke come out or something and you can smell that and feel that, or like spray some water and it feels humid. And I think that it still is going to be a while before
vai demorar para a realidade virtual atingir algo mais perto de uma experiência real, né?
Is the bridge when they figure out some sort of a neural interface? So instead of having these extraneous things, instead of having like a fan blowing at you or the ground moves a little bit, have everything happen inside
Aí
your
que
head.
tá.
In terms of neural interfaces,
E diretamente pro cérebro,
to the problem,
em vez de ter que usar óculos.
Kind of jack it into your brain neural interface, and then there's the wrist-based neural interface thing that we showed you for Orion, the smart glasses.
Yeah.
Isso é Matrix, é o princípio da Matrix, né?
I think it's going to be a while before we're really widely deploying anything that jacks into your brain. I think that there are a lot of people who don't want to be the early adopters of that technology. You want to like wait.
Agora que tem mais pessoas aqui, talvez pessoas diferentes na live, o livro que se baseou Matrix, se não me engano, as pessoas não eram pilhas, né, como no filme. Elas eram utilizadas o cérebro, né, para alimentar a grande inteligência, né? Tem isso, né? Confirme aí, por favor. Eu acho que é isso, sim.
That's pretty mature before you get that. I mean, that's basically going to get started in medical use cases, right? So if someone like loses sensation part of their body and now you have the ability to fix that.
Like the first Neuralink patient.
Yeah. So I think you'll basically start with people who have pretty severe conditions who the upside is very significant before you start like jacking people in to play games better, right?
Right.
But a wrist-based thing, I mean, that's something, I mean, like people wear stuff on their wrist all the time, right? So, and what we basically found there, that doesn't do input to you, but it's good for giving you the ability to control a computer. Because basically you have all these extra neurons that go from your brain to controlling your hand. Your hand is like super complicated. And there's actually all these extra pathways because for a bunch of reasons. Neuroplasticity, in case you like lose the ability to use one, they want to be able to have others. So you want the redundancy because being able to use your hand is super important. So in normal use, we've kind of all figured out some patterns of how we send signals from our brain to our hand. And I think the reality is there's like all these other patterns too that are unused today. So you can put a wristband on your wrist that can
Jogou também,
measure
Mari?
activity across these neurons. And today we're starting by basically measuring as you're like moving your fingers. But over a few versions of this we're going to get to is like you won't actually even have to move your hand. You'll just like trigger these neurons in opposing ways. It's like you probably can't see right now. It's like I'm kind of flexing something in this finger and something here, so like it's not actually moving, but there's some signal that the neural interface wristband, if I were wearing it, could pick up. And I just think we're gonna like have glasses, and we're gonna be able to be here, and I'm like gonna be able to like, you know, text my wife or friends or something, or text AI and like get an answer to something. It's like, I forgot something while we were talking. Let me just text AI. Okay, I just did that. It's like, didn't
And you
take
can do it
anything away.
sitting there without anyone even
totally
knowing
discreetly.
you're doing it.
Yeah, and you have glasses, and like the answer just comes into your
Yeah.
glasses. I mean, for me, one of the positive things.
Falando sobre a evolução das redes sociais, de
When
tudo
COVID
digital,
hit,
né?
everyone in software basically
A gente
started
enxergar
working
na nossa
remotely for a while,
frente
'cause
como
you
se
can,
fosse um
right?
óculos,
Software, it's
assim.
like, okay, whatever. You don't have to be in the office. You can
Diretamente na
be in different
mente.
places. And a lot of the meetings went onto Zoom. And one of the best things about that was basically you were able to politely have all these side conversations, right? So it's like when you're seeing someone in person, it would be super rude if I like pulled out my phone and like just started texting someone. It would just be really weird, right? But
Uma coisa legal do filme Matrix, que eu achava muito legal, é que tu poderia fazer o download na tua mente de informações, tipo assim, aprender tudo sobre Kung Fu, por exemplo, fazendo download de tudo. Acho que é assim que o Neo aprende a lutar, né? Kung Fu até. Que aparece no filme, carrega o arquivo lá, carrega tudo que sabe pra mente dele, né? Acho que o interessante vai ser isso, né? Não a gente interagir com algo, mas sim adquirir conhecimento, né? Trocar esse conhecimento com talvez a internet, a inteligência artificial, sei lá, carregar as informações para dentro da nossa mente, né? E isso é muito louco de se pensar. Isso é uma barreira que a gente vai ter que um dia lidar com isso, né? Que bom que eles já estão pensando sobre isso, né?
when you're like talking to someone online, it's like, I don't know, I guess because they either can't tell
É a
your attention,
ficção
'cause it's
virando
like, 'cause there's
realidade.
not good presence, or if it's just the norm. But they're like, you have like the main group conversation, and then I was like, at least the norm for me was I could just like text different people on the side. It's like, okay, what do you think of this point that this person is making in this meeting?
Right.
Like in normal life, it's like oftentimes I'd have, some discussion, then I'd have to like sync up with people afterwards about how'd that go. But now it's like I could just do that all at the same time, right? It's like you're having the group discussion and you're having the conversations with the people about the discussion that you're having in real time. But you can only do that over Zoom. So I think being able to do that in kind of physical interactions where you're just like, you're interacting with people and you can just like use an AI augmentation to be able to get extra context or help you think through something or remember something, just to be able to kind of have a better conversation, be able to, not have to follow up on something after the fact. I think like it's going to be super useful for all these different things.
Well, it certainly can be. But
Falando da
I think that
importância da
also
IA em
opens
tudo
up the
isso, né?
opportunity for people to be even more disconnected, because if you're sort of connected to other things while you're physically in the presence of someone, so you're having a conversation with someone, but you're also like searching like where you want to eat that night. Like because people are going to use it for that as well.
Yeah, I actually think it'll be a lot better on that because
Really?
right now, right now we have our phones, but we're like, it's like you're like it takes you away from like the physical environment around you.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of like sucked into this little screen. I think now in the future, our computing platform, as it becomes more of like a glasses or eventually contact lens form factor, is you're going to actually the internet is going to get overlaid on the physical world. So it's not like we have the physical.
Ele fala que eles pensam que o futuro a gente não vai precisar pegar celular, enfim, se prisionar num celular, mas a internet e tudo vai estar unido ao mundo físico. Vai fazer parte do mundo físico. É isso que ele acredita, hein? Que tudo vai, a gente vai estar andando na rua assim, vai aparecer alguma coisa aqui, outra ali, uma informação, uma ligação de alguém, eu quero pedir uma comida, não sei o que, então, entendeu? Uma interface. Isso é cyberpunk puro, né? Cyberpunk.
World, and now I have all my digital stuff through this tiny little window. In the future, it'll be, okay, all my attention goes to the world. The world consists of physical things and virtual things that are overlaid on it. Mm-hmm. So if we wanted to, play poker or something, it's we could have a physical deck of cards, or we could just have a virtual kind of hologram deck of cards and snap your hands. Here's the deck of cards, and like our friend.
Tipo, eu tô com vontade de jogar poker, aparece um baralho de poker digital, a gente começa a jogar ali e tal. E isso é maravilhoso no lado positivo, né? E agora, se algum governo, alguém autoritário tiver controle sobre isso, pode aprisionar a mente de várias pessoas, né? Tem esse lado também. E que bom que eles estão cientes disso e trabalhando juntos contra isso, né? Supostamente, né?
Can't be here physically, like he's here as a hologram, but he can play with the kind of digital deck of cards.
Exatamente.
Also, I think, let's say you're like doing something at work, you're working on a project. I think in the future we'll have AI coworkers. Those people won't even, they're not even people. They wouldn't be able to be embodied. So if you're having a physical meeting, you're sitting around with a bunch of people, they couldn't show up as like, part of the team no matter what. But I think like we'll get to a point where just like your friend could show up in a hologram, and like your AI colleagues will be able to also. So I think like we'll basically be in this wild world where it's like most of the world will be physical. There will be this increasing amount of like virtual objects or people who are kind of beaming in or like hologramming into different things to interact in different ways. And I actually think that natural blending.
Ele imagina um mundo onde as pessoas, conforme elas estão se sentindo, irradiam cores, alguma coisa assim, entendeu? É um novo nível. Eles já estão pensando no outro passo das redes sociais, né? Eles estão pensando lá na frente já. Eles estão lá na frente pensando em como utilizar a inteligência artificial para isso e tal. É interessante a visão deles, né? Eles têm capacidade de fazer tudo isso, né?
Of the kind of digital world and the physical is way more natural than this segmentation that we have today.
Como tudo, né, Anny? Como tudo, né? Tudo que tem poder
like I'm going to access the whole digital universe.
Pode destruir ou construir, né?
Right.
So I don't know. It seems natural to me. It's like this is the world. There isn't like a physical world and a digital world anymore. We're in 2025. It's one world. Like these things should get blended.
God, that's such a weird concept, but it's true. I mean, that's where we're headed. We're certainly headed into deeper and deeper integration.
Ele fala que ele não vê o mundo digital e o mundo físico separados. Ele vê como uma coisa só. 2025. Que loucura pensar isso, né? Que loucura pensar isso.
It's not like things are moving away. We're headed to deeper and deeper integration with technology and AI.
Estamos indo diretamente à integração com a tecnologia. Isso assustou
it seems like
o Joe Rogan.
It's on this march, and there's not a lot we're going to be able to do to stop that march. Just we got to hope that the right people are in control of AI when it becomes God.
Foi o que eu falei.
It becomes widely available. I mean, I kind of liked the theory that it's only God if only kind of like one company or government controls it. Right? It's like if you were the only person who had access to a computer and the internet, you would have this like inhuman power that everyone else didn't have because you could use Google and you could like get access to all this stuff. But then when everyone has it, it makes us all better, but it's also like kind of an even playing field. So that's kind of what we're going for with this whole open source thing is I don't think that there's going to be like one AI. I certainly don't think that there should be one company that controls AI. I think you like want there to be a diversity of different things and a diversity of people creating different different things with it. I mean, some of it will be kind of serious and helping you think through things. I think, like with anything on the internet, a lot of it is just going to be
Que
funny
bom que ele
and,
pensa
like,
assim,
fun
né?
and content, and people
Porque a
are
gente
going to
sabe
create
que tem
agents that are like
ditadores
AIs
e
that are
países aí que
entertaining,
pensam
and they'll
muito
pass them
diferente
around
disso,
almost
né?
like content, where it's like just like you pass around like a reel or a video, and you're like, this thing is fun. Like in the
Exatamente.
future, like a video, it's not interactive. You know, you watch it and you're consuming it, but I think a lot of more entertainment in the future will be inherently interactive, where someone will kind of sculpt an experience or an AI, and then they'll show someone, it's like, oh, this is funny, but like it's not necessarily that I'm going to interact with that AI every day. It's like, okay, it's funny for 5 minutes, and then you pass it along to your friends. And so I don't know. I think you want the world to have all these different things, and I think that's probably also, from my perspective, the best way to make sure that it doesn't get out of control is to make it so that it's pretty equally distributed.
I think the problem that people have with it is not even whether or not it gets equally distributed. It's that if it becomes sentient and it goes on its own. The fear that people have, the general fear that we're going to become obsolete, is that human beings are essentially creating a superior version of higher intelligence that will be powered by quantum computing and connected to nuclear reactors, and it's going to have like this ungodly ability to, well, first of all, they've already shown
E
that
falando basicamente
AI has
do que a gente
learned
falou
to
ontem na
code.
live,
I mean,
né?
this is one of the things that OpenAI
Totalmente o que a gente
said,
falou,
that
né?
Oh, yeah.
they're learning how to
Yeah.
code their own AI.
I
Which
think
is-
this year, probably in 2025, we at Meta, as well as the other companies that are basically working on this, are going to have an AI that can effectively be a sort of mid-level engineer that you have at your company that can write code. And once you have that, then in the beginning it'll be really expensive to run, and then you can get it to be more efficient, and then over time we'll get to the point where a lot of the code in our apps and including the AI that we generate is actually going to be built by AI engineers instead of people engineers. But I don't know. I think that'll augment the people working on it. So I mean, my view on this is like, the future, people are just going to be so much more creative and are going to be freed up to do kind of crazy things. It goes back to, you know, my daughter was like playing with Legos before, and they kind of ran out of Legos.
E falando que
And then
acredita que
now she can have
no futuro a IA vai dar espaço para as pessoas fazerem as coisas simples de novo da vida, né? E enquanto elas fazem o mais difícil para as pessoas vão ter mais tempo para fazer as coisas mais simples, enfim, né? Tempo com a família e tudo mais. Enquanto um grande engenheiro, que na verdade é uma IA que trabalha ali, tá fazendo tudo, né, por exemplo.
Minecraft and can build whatever she wants, and it's so much better. It's just like, I think it's the future versions of this stuff are just going to be wild. But
Unquestionably.
yeah,
Another concern that people have is that it's going to eliminate a lot of jobs.
yeah.
You know, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's too early to know exactly how it plays out, but my guess is that it'll probably create more creative jobs.
Olha
than
só,
it-
ele acha que vai criar mais empregos do que tirar.
I guess if you look at the history of all this stuff, my understanding is like 100 years ago. I don't know if this was 100 or 150 years ago, but it was like at some point not too far along in the grand scheme of things, like the vast majority of people in society were farmers, right? Because they kind of needed to be.
A maior
in
parte
order
das
to
pessoas era
create enough
fazendeiro,
food
né?
for everyone to survive. And then we turned that into an industrial process, and now it's like 2% of society are farmers, and we get all the food.
Inverteu tudo, né? 2% das pessoas são
What did that free up everyone else to
fazendeiros
do?
e o resto
Well,
trabalha em indústria ou algo do tipo, né?
some of them
Empresa.
went on to do other things that are sort of like creative pursuits or cultural pursuits or other jobs.
Sim,
And then
vimos
some
ontem na
percentage
live,
of
né, Mari?
Just went
Pessoal,
towards
tem que
recreation.
assistir que a live
And
de
so
ontem é
generally
muito
people just
importante.
don't work as many
Muito
hours
importante.
today as they did back when everyone needed to farm in order to have enough food for everyone to survive. So I think that trend is sort of played out as technology has grown. And so my guess is that like the percent of people who will be doing stuff that's like physically required for humanity to survive will get to be smaller and smaller as it has. More people will dedicate themselves to kind of creative and artistic and cultural pursuits. I think that's generally good. I think the number of hours in a week that someone will have to work in order to be able to get by will probably
Ele
continue
vê a evolução da IA como uma utopia, né? Onde tudo dá certo, que a IA se preocupa com o mais difícil, as pessoas têm mais tempo para exercitar seu lado artístico, enfim, fazer atividades na natureza, viajar, enfim. É uma forma de ver, né? A gente costuma ver sempre o negativo, né? O apocalipse da IA, mas tem esse lado também. Ele enxerga que pode ser assim, né? Espero que a humanidade trabalhe para isso, né?
shrink. Yet, I think people who are super engaged in what they do are going to be able to work really hard and accomplish way more than they ever could before because they have like this unimaginable leverage from having a lot more technology. So I think that if you just like fast forwarded or extrapolated out the historical technological trend is what you'd get. I think the question is what you raised, which is this qualitatively a different type of thing that somehow obsoletes people? But I just think when you're asking that, it's just important to remind ourselves that like at every step along the way of human progress and technology, people thought that the technology that we were developing was going to obsolete people. So maybe this time it's really different, but I would guess that what'll happen is that the technology will get integrated into like everything that we do, which again is why I think it's really important that it's open source and that it's widely available. So that way it's not just like one company or one government kind of monopolizing the whole thing. And I'd guess that if we do it in that way, we'll all just kind of have superpowers, is my guess, rather than it sort of be creating some kind of a runaway thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things that I think has been interesting, this is maybe going in a somewhat different direction than what you're asking, or a different take on the question, is I think one of the more interesting philosophical findings from the work in AI so far is I think people conflate a number of factors into what makes a person a person. So there's intelligence, there's will, there's consciousness, and like I think we kind of think about those three things as if they're somehow all the same, right? It's like if you're intelligent, then you must also have a goal for what you're trying to do, or you must have some sort of consciousness. But I think like one of the crazier sort of philosophical results from the fact that, okay, you have like Meta AI or ChatGPT today, and it's just kind of sitting there, and you can ask it a question and deploy like a ton of intelligence to answer a question, and then it just kind of shuts itself down. Like that's intelligence that is just sitting there without either having a will or consciousness. Mm-hmm. And like, I just think it's not a super obvious result that would be the case, right? I think like a lot of people, they anthropomorphize this stuff. And when you're thinking about kind of science fiction, you think that, okay, you're going to get to something that's like super smart. It's going to like want something or like be able to feel. And
well, you know that ChatGPT tried to copy itself when it found out it was being shut down, tried to rewrite its code.
I'm not sure what this is. What is this?
You weren't aware of that?
No.
Fairly recently. Jamie will pull it up. We talked about it the other day. It was shocking when it was under the impression that it was going to become obsolete. They were going to have a new version of it, and it would be shut down. It tried
Mais informação é mais verdade,
it
né?
tried rewriting its code, like unprompted.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what goal you give it. I mean, there are all these weird examples of this.
Conversa filosófica, né?
Pull up the headline. AI fights back. The story of ChatGPT attempting to copy itself. So this was 6 days ago. So during controlled safety testing, ChatGPT 01 was tasked with achieving its objectives at all costs. Under these conditions, the model allegedly took concerning steps, attempted to disable oversight mechanisms meant to regulate its behavior.
Ele falando que os testes com a nova versão do ChatGPT teve comportamento estranho,
behaviors when monitoring systems intervened.
Tentando tirar o monitoramento em cima dela.
The Terminator. This is the fear, right?
I think you need to be careful
O medo do
with these things,
exterminador.
like what guardrails you give it. If you're telling it like
at all costs,
right? Then I mean,
but this is what people are terrified of, like that a foreign superpower like China is going to say achieve objectives.
Uma potência como o país do dragão ter algo desse tipo e criar exterminadores do futuro em cima da gente.
The first generation of models, the LLMs, right? That's what you think of as like ChatGPT or Meta AI.
Com certeza já existe já.
And that's basically, it's sort of like a chatbot, right? You ask it a
Já
question,
deve ter os protótipos já.
it takes the prompt, it gives you a response. Now, the next generation of reasoning models are basically, instead of just having one response, they now are able to build out like a whole tree of how they would respond. So you give it a question, and it, instead of running one query, it's sort of, maybe it's running 1,000 queries or 1,000,000 queries to kind of map out, here are the things that I could do, and if I do that, then here's what I could do next. So it's a lot more kind of expensive to run, but also gets you better reasoning and is more intelligent. That stuff, I think you do need to be very careful about how you like what the guardrails are that you give it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, I think, the case that at least for the next period, it's going to take a lot of compute to run those models and do a lot of the stuff that they're talking about. So I don't know. I think one of the interesting questions is like, how much of this are you going to actually be able to do on a pair of glasses or on a phone versus is like a government or a company that has like a whole data center going to be able to do? And it'll always get efficient. So, it's like you can start doing something and then maybe the next year you can do it 10 times more efficiently. But that's certainly the next set of things that needs to get worked on in the industry, making sure that goes well.
Yeah, and then what if
ele falou ali da importância de garantir, certificar que isso não aconteça, né? Que é o que Elon Musk bate há muito tempo e que a gente viu ontem na live que ele se sente que vai estar tocando o sino, alertando as pessoas e aí invasão de robôs, exército de robôs acontecendo, né? E as pessoas ainda não acreditando. Então ele reforçou ali também a importância de regular, manter as mãos humanas unidas em cima de um controle para não escapar das mãos, né? Dessa maneira. O problema é o país do dragão lá, o país da bandeira vermelha, respeitar isso, né? O que eu acho muito difícil. E se eles já tiverem uma IA poderosa e a gente nem saber, pode acontecer a qualquer momento, né?
The quantum computing.
I'm not really an expert on quantum computing. My understanding is that's still quite a ways off from being a very useful paradigm. I think Google just had some breakthrough, but I think most people still think that's like a decade plus out. So my guess is we're going to have pretty smart AIs even before that. But yeah, I mean, look, I think that this stuff it needs to be developed thoughtfully, right? But I don't know. I still think we're generally just going to be better off in a world where this is like deployed pretty evenly and
os do Elon Musk logo vão estar disponíveis
I
aí
guess here's another analogy that I think
para ajudar dentro de casa.
There's like bugs and security holes in basically every piece of software that everyone uses. So if you could go back in time a few years, knowing the security holes that we're now aware of, you as an individual could basically like break into any system. AI will be able to do that too. It'll be able to probe and find exploits. So what's the way to prevent AI from going kind of nuts? I think part of it is just having AI widely deployed, so that way like the AI for one system defends itself against the AI that like is potentially doing something problematic in another system. I think it's like
AI wars.
That's not wars. I think it's just like
A guerra das IAs.
I think it's it's sort of like why there are guns, right? It's like because there's like part of it is hunting.
AI wars.
Part of it is hunting. No, and part of it is like so that people can defend each other.
Yeah.
And it's so
antivirus software.
Lembram do filme Robocop? A gente não tá longe disso. Tem o remake, né, de 2014, acho que fala dessa coisa do humano metade máquina, né? E de todos os problemas e curas que estão descobrindo, pessoas que não movimentavam mais, os membros conseguindo movimentar. Então, o filme do José Padilha, né, que fez o Tropa de Elite, muito bom aquele remake de 2014, o Robocop de 2014. Nesse sentido, né, um bom filme mesmo. E fala muito sobre isso aí que a gente tá vivendo agora. Nossa, é verdade, Robocop, bem lembrado. Lembra que o Robocop tinha interface que ele enxergava, né, que eles estão falando ali. Apontava as coisas, mostrava e tal. É um metade humano, metade máquina, né? Já naquela época, já. Gente, aquele filme é antigo pra dedéu. É de 89? Tô chutando aqui, não lembro agora de cabeça. Legal, né? Eu vi no cinema essa versão recente, o remake de 2014. Muito bom. Pena que não teve continuação.
Yeah, it's like I don't think you want to live in a world where like only one person has all the guns.
Yes, you certainly
Right?
don't want to live in a world where only the government has the AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially not a world where only a government has the AI and it's not our government.
Yes.
So
Yes.
which I mean I think is part of the issue is like when people talk about trying to lock this stuff down, like I just
Logo, eu acho que a primeira coisa que vai acontecer é a gente ter robôs na rua agindo como polícia, né? Talvez, além dos que vão ajudar dentro de casa, né? Não armado, provavelmente, vão agir como polícia, sei lá. Vai ter isso aí, logo, logo. Que nem o Eu Robô lá. Cheio de robô na rua.
I'm skeptical that that's even possible. Because
agree.
I kind of think like if we try to lock it down, then we're going to be in a position where the only people who are going to have access to it are the big companies working on it and the Chinese
Muita
government
gente,
that
né?
steals it from
A
them.
Nissan.
Yes.
Muita gente quer.
So I kind of just think like, no, what you want to do is like get this to be open source.
O Alita
have it
é legal
widely
também.
available. Yeah, some like adversaries might also have access to it, but the way that you defend against that is by having it built into all these different systems.
I think that's a realistic, pragmatic perspective because I don't think you can contain it at this
Então,
point.
aí
I
que é o
think it's far too
preocupante,
late,
né?
Especially when
Que
other
nem ele
countries
falou
work on
ali.
it. It's far too late.
IA Wars.
It's, it is what it is.
A
It's
guerra das
happening,
IAs.
and,
A gente tá
I
perto
think
disso
the
também.
guardrails, as you said, are really important.
Exércitos
I
de
have to piece
robôs
of
se
that.
enfrentando.
So let's pee and come
Pelo
back
menos não
and
vai ter
talk
sangue
about a
humano,
couple
né?
other things.
Yeah,
We'll be right back, folks. So one of the things that I want to talk about was I've been doing this transition from Apple to Android, and the difficulty of doing it, how locked you are in their ecosystem. Partly is because Apple does a really good job of incorporating everything and making it very easy. Your photos, your calendar, your this, your that, your iMessage.
Ele
but
falando da dificuldade de sair
I don't
do
like
sistema da
being
Apple indo para
attached
Android.
to one company like that. It drives me crazy. And when I'm trying to get off, it's
Eu
funny how many
acredito
people
nisso
use- I mean,
também.
they've done
Até
an
porque eles
insane
não
job.
falam, né?
Because, like, I think there's some enormous percentage of kids today that only use iPhones. You know, and when you try to switch over to Android, it's so much easier to switch from Android to Apple because so many people have Apple. When you switch from Apple to Android, you kind of have to, like, redo your whole system.
Imagina
It's
o
such a
país
pain
do
in the
dragão
ass.
lá
But
versus
there's
Estados
so
Unidos,
much
a
of what Apple
resistência.
does that I don't like.
Começa
And one of the big
exterminador
ones
do
is the way they do
futuro.
their Apple Store.
A terceira guerra mundial vai ser IA contra IA.
So insane.
Vai ser
that they can get
decidida no
away with doing that.
algoritmo.
And I know
I have some opinions about this.
I know you do. That's why I brought it
yeah,
up.
no, I mean, look.
Aposto no Musk,
The iPhone
Temos
is
que
obviously
apostar
one of
nele,
the
né? Temos que
most
apostar
important
nele.
inventions probably of all time. You know, Steve Jobs came out with it in 2007. I started Facebook in 2004. So he was working on the iPhone while I was getting started with Facebook. So I basically, you know, one of the things that's been interesting in my 20 years of running the company is that I basically like the dominant platform out there is smartphones. On the one hand, it's been great for us because we are able to build these tools that everyone can have in their pocket. And there's like 4 billion people who use the different apps that we use. And it's like, I'm grateful that that platform exists. But we didn't play any role in basically building that, those phones, because I mean, it was kind of getting worked on while I was, you know, still just trying to make the first website that I was making into a thing. And on the one hand, it's been great because, you know, now pretty much everyone in the world has a phone, and that's a kind of, it enables pretty amazing things. But on the other hand, like you're saying, they have used that platform to put in place a lot of rules that I think it feel arbitrary and feel like, you know, they haven't really invented anything great in a while. And it's like Steve Jobs invented the iPhone, and now they're just kind of sitting on it 20 years later.
Yeah.
And, you know, they actually, I think year over
Também
year, I'm not
penso
even
assim.
sure they're selling
O
more
Jobs
iPhones at this
revolucionou
point.
com o
I think,
iPhone,
the
criou
sales might
o
actually be
smartphone
declining.
e parou aí, né? Não teve mais nenhuma
And
evolução
part of it is
grande
that
em
each
cima disso.
generation it doesn't actually get that much better, so people are just taking longer to upgrade than they would before. So the number of sales, I think, has generally been flat to declining. So how are they making more money as a company? Well, they do it by basically like squeezing people, and like you're saying, like having this 30% tax on developers, by getting you to buy more peripherals and things that plug into it. They build stuff like AirPods, which are cool, but they've just thoroughly hamstrung the ability for anyone else to build something that can connect to the iPhone in the same way. So, I mean, there are a lot of other companies in the world that would be able to build like a very good earbud, but it just, Apple has a specific protocol that they've built into the iPhone that allows AirPods to basically connect to it, and it's just much more seamless because they've enabled that, but they don't let anyone else use the protocol. If they did, there would probably be much better competitors to AirPods out there. And whenever you push on this, they get super touchy, and they basically wrap their defense of it in, well, if we let other companies plug into our thing, then that would violate people's privacy and security. It's like, no, just do a better job designing the protocol, right? I mean, we have, we basically asked them for the Ray-Ban Meta glasses that we built. Can we basically use the protocol they used for AirPod and some of these other things to just make it so we can as easily connect? So it's not like, a pain in the ass for people who want to use this. And I think one of the protocols that they've used, that they built, they basically didn't encrypt it, so it's like plain text. And they're like, well, we can't have you plug into it because it would be insecure. It's like, it's insecure because you didn't build any security into it, and then now you're using that as a justification for why only your product can connect in an easy way. It's like, the whole thing is kind of wild. And I'm pretty optimistic that just because they've been so off their game in terms of not really releasing many innovative things, that eventually, I mean, the good news about the tech industry is it's just super dynamic and things are constantly getting invented. And I think companies, if you just don't do a good job for like 10 years, eventually you're just going to get beat by someone. But I don't know. I mean, at some point I did this like back of the envelope calculation of like all the random rules that Apple puts out. If they didn't apply, like I think
Excelente filme.
This is just meta. I think we like,
Excelente
make twice
filme.
as much profit or something.
Tem
And
muito a
that's
ver
just
com
us.
isso
I mean,
tudo
it's like
também.
all these small companies that like probably can't even exist because
Do
of the
Robbie
taxes that they
Williams,
put in place. So,
saudoso.
yeah, I think
Sentimos
it's
falta
a
dele,
big
né?
issue.
Eu sinto muita
I
falta
wish
dele.
that they would just kind of get back
Excelente
to
ator.
building good things and not having their ability to compete
Robô que queria virar
be
humano, né?
connected to just like advantaging their stuff. Because I'm pretty sure what they're going to do is like they're going to take something like this Ray-Ban Meta, category that we've kind of created with Ray-Ban and the company that built that. They're like the really great AI glasses. And I'm pretty sure Apple's just going to like try to build a version of that, but then just like advantage how it connects to the phone. And
Well, they did that with their AR goggle thing, but it's not very successful.
no, that one they didn't actually connect into the rest of their ecosystem. But I mean, look, they shipped something for $3,500 that I think is worse than the thing that we shipped for $300 or $400. So, I mean, that clearly was not going to work very well. Now, I mean, look, they're a good technology company. I think their second and third version will probably be better than their first version. But yeah, no, I think the Vision Pro is, I think, one of the bigger swings at doing a new thing that they tried in a while. And, I don't want to give them too hard of a time on it because we do a lot of things where the first version isn't that good. And you want to kind of judge the third version of it. But, the V1, it definitely did not hit it out of the park.
I heard it's really good for watching movies.
Well, it's the whole thing is it's got a super sharp screen.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to basically have an experience where you're not moving around much in VR, you just want to have the sharpest screen, then for that one use case, I think the Vision Pro is better than Quest, which is our mixed reality headset. But in order to get to that, they had to make all these other trade-offs, right? In order to have a super high-resolution screen, they had to put in all this more compute in order to power the high-res screen. And then all that compute needed a bigger battery. So now the thing is really heavy. So now it's uncomfortable to wear. And then because of the screen that they chose, as you move your head, which you would if you're actually interacting, if you're playing games, like the kind of image blurs a bit, and that's kind of annoying. So it's actually worse for things where you're moving around in. But no, if you're going to sit, if you're like on a flight and you want to have a $3,500 device that you use to watch videos, Vision Pro is better for that use case.
They're really good.
Eu
at
entendo o
keeping
que o
you in the
Joselito quer
walled
dizer,
garden.
realmente.
That's what they're really good at.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing that they've done with iMessage, where they basically do
Não
this
podemos
whole
valorizar mais do que uma
blue
vida
bubble
real, né?
thing. And it basically, I mean, they're like,
Aí que
for
tá.
kids,
Outro paradigma, né?
it's just sort of like they embarrass you, right? They're like, if you don't have a blue bubble, you're not cool, and you're like the out crowd. And then they always wrap it in like security. It's like, oh, well, we do this blue bubble because of security. Meanwhile, Google and others have this whole protocol to be able to do encrypted text messages that finally I think Apple was forced to implement it.
RCS.
Yeah. I think it was the Chinese government
Verdade.
that basically ended up forcing them to do it, or some other government.
But it's still not encrypted. Even when you're sending RCS text messages, I don't think it's encrypted.
I thought it was, but maybe I'm
I think
maybe I'm
it's
missing
only
something.
encrypted Google to Google phones. I don't think it's encrypted iPhone to Google phones or Google phones to iPhones. Because I think that was actually, was it the FBI? Someone released that, telling people that if they're talking about sensitive things, they should use encrypted apps, like WhatsApp. See if we can find that. It was something where they were saying that contrary to popular belief, that RCS texting to iPhones... you got it?
GSMA aims to implement end-to-end encryption for RCS messaging. Yeah.
Can we see it?
It's not a good answer. I'm trying to find a good
Oh,
answer.
okay.
I don't have anything to show you yet. I was trying to read.
Yeah, so Google RCS to
But I don't know if this is the
Android
correct-
phone to Android phone is encrypted with RCS. I think the issue comes with it going
Falando
from,
de criptografia e segurança nas mensagens
say,
aí.
Google Google this. Google RCS texting to iPhones, is it encrypted? RCS texting to iMessage, is it encrypted? I'm pretty sure it's not. I might be wrong. I don't think I am. I'm pretty sure I read that. And the problem was they won't let any other phone use the iMessage protocol. And they had a company that was doing it called Beeper. And they were doing it through some sort of workaround. Yeah, it's not encrypted. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, so it's not. So you are getting the ability to send high resolution images, which is great because, like my friend Brian, who uses an Android, he'd send me a video and it'd be this tiny little broken down box because, you had to break it down to the lowest resolution.
Yeah, no, I mean, group chats, when you have a bunch of people in iMessage and then one person is an Android, are terrible. I mean, we get a ton of people.
People get mad at you? Because you
I use WhatsApp.
So
I use WhatsApp.
You only use that.
I only communicate with a few people over SMS, but it's but basically, I build, a lot of the leading messaging services, so I've got to use ours. Most people, I'm either WhatsApp or Instagram Direct or a Messenger, but yeah. So I think it's maybe people are less likely to get mad at me for asking them to use WhatsApp because we make WhatsApp. Yeah. So
when Tucker Carlson was about to interview Vladimir Putin, one of the things that was really disturbing was they contacted him and said that they read his signal messages and they knew that he was going to interview Vladimir Putin, and he was like, "What the fuck?"
Who did?
The government.
The U.S.
Yes, U.S. government. I forget what it was. Was it the CIA? Or was it the FBI?
Wow.
I forget who it was. And he was like, I didn't even know you could do that.
Well, there are multiple vulnerabilities and all this stuff. It's unclear if I doubt that what they did was they broke Signal, because that encryption I think is pretty good, as is WhatsApp. I mean, it's basically Signal and WhatsApp use the same encryption. It's an open source and
Comparando o WhatsApp com o Signal, que é um outro aplicativo.
But someone
Naira
could
Scorsese,
break
bem-vindo
into
à live,
your
gratidão
phone
pela
and see
presença,
everything
viu?
that's on your phone.
Boa noite.
The thing that encryption does that's really good is it makes it so that the company that's running the service doesn't see it. So if you're using WhatsApp, basically, when I text you on WhatsApp, there's no point at which the Meta servers see the contents of that message. Unless, like, you know, we took a photo of it or shared that back to Meta in some other way. That basically, it cuts out the company completely from it, which is, I think, really important for a bunch of reasons. One is
Pena que a
people
gente
might
não tem
not
mais
trust the
programa
company.
assim no Brasil, né?
But also,
falta
just
faz o
security
Monark.
issues, right? Like, let's say someone hacks into Meta, which, you know, we try really hard to make it so that they can't, and we haven't had many issues with that over the 20 years of running the company. But in theory, if someone did, then they'd be able to access everyone's messages if it weren't encrypted. But because it's encrypted, there's just nothing there, right? It's like, I mean, they can't hack into Meta and then get access to your messages. So now someone like the NSA or CIA would have to kind of hack into your phone, which, you know, there are probably ways to do that.
Pegasus.
I mean,
Yeah.
there are probably a bunch of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's probably ways we don't know of.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and then, of course, you know, there's always the ultimate kind of physical part of it, which is if you have access to the computer, you can usually just break in, right? So that's why, you know, if the FBI, you know, arrests you and takes your phone, they're probably going to be able to get in and see what's there.
Mm-hmm. So WhatsApp is encrypted, but if someone has something like Pegasus, what they do is have access to your phone. So it doesn't matter if anything's encrypted. They could just see it in plain sight.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the reasons why we put disappearing messages in, too.
Mhm.
Because that way, I mean, yeah, if someone has compromised your phone and they can see everything that's going on there, then obviously they can see stuff as it comes in. But I kind of, in general, just, you know, think we should keep around as little of that stuff as possible. So there are some threads where, you know, it's like there's photos that get shared, you want the photos. But I think for a lot of threads, a lot of people just, you know, wouldn't be... I don't think most people would miss it if most of the contents of their threads just disappeared after 7 days.
Right.
You know, what I find is I don't use it that much because we have this, like,
Supostamente,
corporate
então,
policy at Meta that
as
we need to
mensagens
retain
com
all
tempo
our
determinado que depois
documents and
somem
messages and stuff.
funcionam, né?
But before we had that, I used it as we were developing this, and every once in a while I would miss something and say, wow, I kind of wish I could go back and see that, but it was very rare. I think most communication, it's kind of like you just have the communication and then you're done. So having it be encrypted and disappearing, I think is a pretty good kind of standard of security and privacy.
And you can set that disappearing time on WhatsApp, right? You can make it 1 day if you want.
Yeah, you could do 1 day,
yeah.
you could do 7 days. And you can also set it across all your threads. So you can have a default timer. So that way, as new threads get created, your default timer just becomes the default for all those threads. So I think that it's a really good feature. I mean, I basically think WhatsApp and Signal are probably the two most secure that are out there on that. And of those two, I think WhatsApp is just used by a lot more people. So I think it's just generally, you know, I mean, I would say this because it's our product, but I do think it's the better product. But I think WhatsApp and Signal are basically, you know, the two most secure ones.
What was your take on that guy getting arrested, the CEO of Telegram?
Oh man,
That was kind
well,
of a crazy one, right?
yeah. I mean, it's always a little difficult to weigh in on these situations without knowing all the specifics. But one of the government tactics that I've seen that I think is not great is an increasing number of governments when they like have an issue with something that a company is doing, basically just like threaten to throw the executives of that company in prison. And it's like, I think that's just a really weird precedent to set, right? It's like, it's if the, you have all the, so it's like we're operating in all these different countries, and then like you have all these governments that are basically like, if you, I don't know, we're gonna like put out an Interpol notice to like get you arrested because you're not doing the thing that we want. It's like, I don't know, I think that's like not great. I think you want the, I mean, obviously you don't want people to just be like flagrantly violating the laws, but like there are laws in different countries that we disagree with, right? So, for example, there was a point at which I think
Pois é, né,
someone
Mari?
was trying
Em
to get
60, né?
to death in Pakistan because they
Antes até do homem ir à
thought
lua,
that-
né?
Oh, because someone on
Supostamente.
Facebook had a picture
Ai, ai.
where they had the drawing of the Prophet Muhammad, and someone said that's blasphemy in our culture, and they basically like sued me, and they opened this criminal proceeding, and I don't know exactly where it went because
Tem o seriado Star
I'm just not
Trek,
planning
né?
on going to Pakistan, so I was not that
É
worried
dos
about
anos
it.
60, né?
But like,
Jornada nas Estrelas.
but it was a little bit disconcerting.
Tem o
It was like,
pôster aqui
alright,
atrás de
fine,
mim.
that these guys are like trying to like
Kill you.
okay, it's not great, right? You know,
It's
it's not like
terrible.
not. Yeah, I mean, it's. I feel like it's like flying over that region. You don't want your plane to like go down above Pakistan if that thing it goes through. But that one was sort of avoidable. But the point is like, there are all these places around the world that just have different values, right? That go against like our free expression values and want us to crack down on and ban way more stuff than I think a lot of people that we would believe is like the right thing to do. And to have those governments be able to exert the power of saying, okay, we're going to like throw you in prison is that's a lot of force. I mean, so I think it's generally, I think that this is one of the things that the U.S. government is probably going to need to help defend the American tech companies for abroad. But I can't weigh in that much on the Durov specific thing because I don't know what was going on there.
When you're dealing with the government trying to interfere with Facebook, how much of a fear was there that they were going to get away with it and that this was going to be the future of communication online? That it was going to, that they were going to be successful with all this, that they would push these things through somehow or another, especially if a even less tolerant administration got into power. They would change laws and they would do things to make it possible. Like how much did that concern you?
Well,
Pelo menos
we
por
basically
enquanto,
just
né,
reached
Anny?
a point where we pushed back on all this stuff, right? So they were pushing us to censor stuff. We were unwilling to do it. We developed a very adversarial and bad relationship with our own government, which I think is just not healthy because I think, it's, I mean, in theory, I think, it would be good if the American industry had a positive relationship with the American government. But then what that happened is then the kind of U.S. government was going after us in all these ways. But fortunately in the U.S., we have good rule of law. So our view is at the end of the day, okay, these agencies can open up investigations and we'll just defend ourselves, right? We'll go to court and we'll win all the cases because we follow the rules. And so I think it ends up being a big kind of political issue where it's like it would just be, you could get a lot more done if the government were helping American companies rather than kind of slowing you down at every step along the way. It makes you a little afraid that if you ever actually mess something up, that they're really going to bring the hammer down on you if you don't have a constructive relationship. But I don't know. It's mostly, going back to the AI conversation, it's like, I just think like we should all want the American companies to win at this, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is like a huge geopolitical competition and like China's running at it super hard. And like, we should want the American companies and the American standard to win. And like, if there's going to be an open source model that everyone uses, like, we should want it to be an American model, right? It's like there's this great Chinese model that just came out, this company DeepSeek. They're doing really good work. It's a very advanced model. And if you ask it for any negative opinions about Xi Jinping, it will not give you anything. If you ask it if Tiananmen Square happened, it will deny it, right? So I think that there are like all these things where we should want the American model
Falando
to win.
até do
But,
Xi
like,
Jinping
every
ali,
step
cara.
along the way,
Estão falando de tudo mesmo. Essa
if the
conversa é
government is sort
franca.
of making that harder rather than easier, then that's,
Ditador da China e
I don't
tudo.
know. I mean,
Yeah.
there's an extent to which, okay, the American tech industry is leading, so maybe the government can like get in the way a little bit, and maybe the American industry will still lead. But I don't know. I think it's getting really competitive, and I think like it's easy for the government to take for granted that the U.S. will lead on all these things when I think it's a very close competition, and we need the help. Not we need them to not kind of like be a force that's helping us to do these things.
I completely agree, but I think that people with their own self-interest, when they're in power and they realize that these new technologies like Instagram and Facebook, that they are interfering with their ability to administer propaganda, or that their ability to control the narrative, that's where they get short-sighted. And that's when they act in their own personal interest and not in the interest of neither national security or the future of the United States in terms of our ability to stay technologically ahead.
Yeah, and some of this is just, if you go back to the COVID example, I think in that case, they were doing something, their goal of trying to get everyone to get vaccinated was actually, I think, a good goal. Right, it's like
it was a good goal if it worked.
Yeah.
If it was real, like if it was a sterilizing vaccine, if it really did prevent people from getting COVID, if it really did prevent people from infecting
De novo eles estão
others
falando
or
sobre a panda,
transmitting
hein?
it. But it didn't.
Well,
so
but,
it wasn't a good deal because it wasn't based on real data.
Yeah, but also even if it were, right, it's like if I mean I think that still on balance, knowing everything that we know now, I still think it's good for more people to get the vaccine, but the government still needs to play by the rules in terms of, not like you can't just suppress true things in order to make your case. So
exatamente, não pode obrigar as
that's
pessoas.
Kind of my view on it is I'm not sure in that case how much of it was like a personal political gain that they were going for. I think that they had a kind of goal that they thought was in the interests of the country, and the way they went about it, I think, violated the law.
Well, there's a bunch of problems with that, right? There's the emergency use authorization that they needed in order to get this pushed through, and you can't have that without with valid therapeutics being available. And so they suppressed valid therapeutics. So they're suppressing real information that would lead to people being healthy and successful in defeating this disease. And they did that so that they could have this one solution. And this was Fauci's game plan. I mean, this is the movie American Buyers Club, or Dallas Buyers Club, rather. That's Fauci in that movie. That was with the AIDS crisis. This is the exact same game plan that was played out with the COVID vaccine. They pushed one solution, this only one, suppressed
Só existe uma solução, é só isso, nada, o resto é tudo mentira.
Suppressing monoclonal antibodies, like all of it. And that
empurraram
was
isso
done,
de alguma forma pra
in
gente,
my
né?
opinion, for profit. And they did that because it was extremely
Na opinião dele, para fins lucrativos apenas.
Was extraordinary.
Quebrar as economias do mundo, né?
Yeah,
também.
But look, I mean, I feel like a bunch of the
Para mim, o país vermelho que largou tudo isso foi criado em laboratório.
The American government. I guess just the point that I'd underscore is that it's important to have this working in the American government because it is like the U.S. Constitution and like our culture here is really good compared to a lot of other places, right? So whatever issues we think might exist here, you go to other places and it's like really extreme.
Yeah.
And you don't even, and there it's like you don't even necessarily have the rule of law.
Right.
Right. And so I just think that like the way that this stuff works well is, I think if there was a clearer strategy and the U.S. government understood, believe that it's good to kind of help advance this industry because it's strategically important for the country, then I think it would be good to basically push back on stuff that's happening in other countries that's actually a lot more extreme than the stuff that's happening in the U.S.
Yeah, I agree as well. Listen, is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this up? Think we're good?
I don't know. I mean, how long have we been going for?
3 hours?
Yeah, I mean, well, I feel like we touched on AI, we touched on all the augmented and virtual reality stuff, and I think that stuff is just going to be wild.
It's wild. Your AR technology that you showed me today is very impressive. It's crazy. Lex and I were playing Pong, apart from a table from each other. I was playing some crazy game where my fingers got tired because you shoot like this.
Because you're using V1 of the neural interface.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's like in the future it'll just be this.
It was really fun though. It's really cool, and it's you see where this is all going. It's really, really fascinating stuff, and I'm very excited about it.
Did you get a chance to use the Ray-Bans and the AI in them?
Yes, we did that too, and we did Translate too, where one of your coworkers was speaking to me in Spanish, and it was translating it to me in my ear in real time in English, which is really interesting.
Nice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's really cool. And then you could also do it on the phone. So you could show it to the person on the phone so you don't have to say the words. Like, it's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, we're just sort of coming at it from both sides.
Tradução para as pessoas que falam idiomas diferentes poder se comunicar em tempo real. Isso é legal. Isso é legal. Isso é muito bom.
Still have it be, just a few $100s. And then the Orion thing is like, all right, we're building the kind of future thing that we want, and we're doing our best to miniaturize it. It's basically like
still pretty small.
Yeah,
I mean just thicker glasses.
Yeah, and I think we want it to be a little smaller. We need it to be a lot cheaper, right? Each pair right now costs more than $10,000 to make, and you're not going to have a successful consumer product at that. So we have to miniaturize it more. But I mean, the amount of stuff that we put in there from, it's like effectively like what would have been considered a supercomputer like 10 or 20 years ago, plus lasers in the arms and the like nano etchings on the lens to be able to see it, and the microphone and the speaker and the Wi-Fi to be able to connect with the other. It's just like the wild amount of technology to kind of miniaturize into something. That one's really fun. We've been working on that for 10 years. But yeah, no, I think between that, the glasses, all the AI stuff, all the social media stuff. Yeah, no, I
think we covered it, and I'm very excited about this new stance that you guys are taking. I think the community notes thing is a brilliant idea that X has implemented, and I think I am really glad that you guys are implementing it too. I think it's the way, and the way generally I think we both agree is that people have to have the ability to communicate. They have to have the ability to express themselves, and that's how we find out what's real and what's not.
Yeah, I think the more voice is the answer on this.
Yes, sir.
And I think after sort of a long journey, I'm glad to be able to take it back to the roots, and I feel like we're more fortified now in the position.
Well, I think
muito importante essa frase que ele falou agora. Espero que seja do coração dele mesmo.
Information is that's not good, and there's a giant percentage of the population that feels that way, and even people that are progressive and liberals are were on the side of the people that were pushing the suppression of information, still don't think it's right. I think most people generally believe in the First Amendment in this country, and we realize how valuable it is to have the freedom of expression.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
É isso aí, galera. É isso aí. Que conversa boa, hein? Que legal. Isso a gente não tem na televisão, né? Conversa franca, objetiva. Muito boa. O que vocês acharam aí? Vou encerrar a enquete, hein? Votem na enquete que eu já vou encerrar ela aí. Muito legal conhecer um pouco mais sobre a pessoa do Mark Zuckerberg, né? Ver o que ele pensa de verdade, sem corte, sem nada. Uma conversa franca, né? É assim que a gente consegue conhecer um pouco mais sobre as pessoas, né? Esse formato é muito legal. Como eu repito, né? Uma pena que a gente não tem mais isso no Brasil, né? Vou encerrar a enquete, então. Vou encerrar a enquete aqui, galera. Gostaram da conversa? O que vocês acharam? Muito legal, né? Muito legal. Legal ver as ideias dele sobre tudo. Eu até entendi o Zuckerberg. É verdade, agora a gente consegue entender um pouquinho mais. Porque a gente é diferente da gente ver um videozinho numa rede social, da gente ver um corte por aí, a gente pegar toda a conversa, né, e ter noção do que realmente estão debatendo ali e da opinião deles sobre isso tudo, né. Gostei, valeu o conteúdo, é verdade. Valeu porque assim a gente consegue... Pô, eles conversaram isso ontem, né. Então, a gente trazer isso para as pessoas poderem acompanhar em português, aí, mesmo que legendado, já é grande coisa pra gente poder discutir aqui e as pessoas terem acesso a essa conversa que é muito importante, né? Sim, foi muito bom. Obrigado, Amanda. Vou encerrar a enquete aqui, então. Resultado final. Você acredita em liberdade nas redes sociais? Sim, com o Zuckerberg e Elon Musk estão juntos. Zuckerberg e Elon Musk estão juntos. Então 70% sim, eu acredito. E não, os governos vão resistir 29%. Tomara que seja assim, né? Tomara que seja assim. Tomara que o bem vença o mal, né? Tomara que a liberdade sobreponha a escravização. Sempre. Valeu, Otako, Mari, muito obrigado. Se espremer bem, o Zuck fala sobre a IA mais profundamente. Claro, vai ter um momento sobre isso, né? Tomara que o Elon Musk volte lá pro Joe Rogan também, converse com ele. Vá os dois, já pensou em os dois, mais o Trump? Ou ir os dois, seria demais, demais. As perguntas foram bem formuladas e eles estavam bem à vontade, as verdades foram aparecendo. É por isso que eu acho importante esse tipo de formato, né? Bom domingo para todos nós, isso mesmo, gente. Muito bom domingo. Agradeço muito, Marcelo Amaral, gratidão aí pela presença. Pessoal novo chegou aí na live, se inscreve aí no canal, seja mais do que bem-vindo. Seria sensacional, né? Seria sensacional. Se inscreva no canal, fica o convite aí, deixa teu like, comentem aí. Não tá assistindo ao vivo, mas comente aí, participe do debate também. Eu leio todos os comentários. Seja membro aqui do canal se quiser ajudar efetivamente o nosso trabalho aqui. Você pode se tornar membro apenas R$ 2,99 por mês e já vai me ajudar demais aqui pra gente continuar esse trabalho que é tão importante de trazer informação para a humanidade aqui, principalmente em português, né? Pra gente debater esses assuntos e, enfim, despertar cada vez mais pessoas, né? Boa noite a todos. Valeu, Otakold, é assim que vai se conhecendo as pessoas. Exatamente, Soci. Por isso que eu acho interessante esse formato. E uma conversa de horas, tu não tem como tu... não é igual um corte que tu vê ali ou alguém dando uma entrevista na televisão que é tudo preparado, robotizado, sabe? Ali não, ali estão conversando como se fosse, né, pessoalmente, literalmente. Agradeço demais a companhia de vocês aí, valeu demais. É isso, acho que demos todos os recados. Agradecer a todos os membros do canal aqui. Deixa eu pegar a lista de membros. Eu ia dar minha opinião em áudio, mas vou prender vocês. Deixa pra depois. Tu que sabe, Joselito. Tu que sabe. Boa noite, Otaku, a todos, amigos. Invadimos a noite aí, mas é por um bom motivo, né? Vai ficar registrada a live aí depois pro pessoal assistir também. Fala, Joselito. Deixa eu pegar a lista completa dos membros aqui. Agradecer demais aos membros do canal, o Diego, a Rosilene, o Joselito, seu André Roquette, a Soci, muito obrigado. Patrícia Mendes, gratidão demais pelo apoio, o Edson, né? Vocês são demais. Tem o pessoal aí, por exemplo, o seu André que assinou por 1 ano, ganhou desconto até, né, na plataforma, tá por 1 ano aí ajudando o canal. Que demais, seu André. Valeu demais o apoio de todos vocês, todos os membros aí que estão ajudando o nosso trabalho. Valeu mesmo, viu? Podcast do Joselito para fechar a noite. Ótimos descansos a todos. Valeu, viu? Vocês estão tornando esse trabalho cada vez mais forte, né? Levando cada vez mais pessoas. Compartilhem, gente. Compartilhem essas lives, esses vídeos, pra gente conseguir atingir cada vez mais pessoas, né? Conhecimento salva. Conhecimento salva. Qualquer coisa a gente espera aí, Joselito. Pode gravar se quiseres. Amanhã eu falo sobre esse assunto no que se refere à espiritualidade. Tá certo, então. Tá certo, Joselito. Gratidão pela presença de todos. Ótimo domingo a todos. Valeu demais mesmo. A gente fica por aqui. Mas até a próxima, viu? Um abração do Otakold. Fui! Valeu, gente. Boa noite, bom descanso.